All right. Hello, everybody. Today we're doing something a little bit different. I got inspired by Thomas Enevoldson's third part of his D&T article came out today, and he talked a lot about sideboarding and how to sideboard in different matchups and strategy and stuff like that. So I kind of got inspired to just sit down and talk about it. Writing sideboard guides is a long and strenuous process. I found it a little bit easier to just actually sit and kind of just train of thought talk about it. It might be a little more inconsistent, but I'm going to try to write some of my thoughts down, like general sideboarding plans and stuff like that. I'll actually open up Notepad here in case I actually start typing out the ins and outs that I usually do for certain matchups. But anyway, I do want to preface the start of my stream as well with I am not the end-all be-all of Death and Taxes knowledge. I'm definitely not. I'm not even close to that. I'm not claiming to be better than anyone else at knowing how to sideboard, or when I disagree with people's sideboard options, I'm not saying that my ideas are always better. This is just my train of thought that I wanted to share, since I'm an avid D&T streamer and a lot of people come to hang out, and sometimes people ask me oh, do you have a sideboard guide? I want to give my thoughts on the matchup. I kind of wanted to read basically what Enevoldson said about sideboarding first to kind of go along with that. What did he say here? Where is it? Here we go. Please keep in mind that everything with D&T, everything is wonderfully contextual, and that you should always use your own judgment in the current game situation. Ask yourself the evergreen question: how do I lose? Blah blah blah. Legacy, even though Legacy is a relatively stable format without too many new cards each set, I find that it's still somewhat in flux at all times, so I constantly develop and refine my sideboard plans, and you should too. This guide reflects my current approach to some of the most popular decks in Legacy, but I always look for ways to improve or adapt based on what I see out of the opponent's board, as well as what experiences through repetition teaches me about roles in matchups and key cards. That is, the number one thing. Never just go to a sideboard guide and just cut and paste, be like, okay, yeah, they said do this, so I'm just always going to bring in these cards. Always be adapting, always be changing your own plans, your cards in and out. Because I know I do. There are some things that are just totally set in stone. Oh, never you never board out Violet except for against Nick Fit, which Enevoldson just totally threw out the window, which I had never really considered. I still not comfortable doing things like that, but there are always ideas that are different than your own, and maybe they're better, maybe they're worse, but just try to take into account just everything is flexible, especially with sideboarding. Sideboarding is just a really, really hard thing to do correctly. So anyway, enough with that rant, I guess, and we can actually talk about sideboarding. So I have my list here instead of Enevoldson's here. So there are definitely. Oh, whoops. Nope. That ad needs to be muted. Anyway. So when I'm talking about my sideboarding things, I'll try to talk a little bit about what Enevoldson's list is doing and how he sideboards a little bit and kind of juxtapose the two. I'm not saying my ideas are better, I'm not saying my ideas are different, and sometimes my plans are different, but I think in general I agreed with almost everything he said about the plans in certain matchups. I just don't agree with some of the card choices, or I think I like some card choices better than others. You're welcome, Minnifer. It only happened because I finally figured I was trying to mod Patrick during that stream last Friday or something. I couldn't find the add mod button. I was too lazy to do it myself, but I got it in, so there's a Matzel command now. Anyway, let's begin talking about sideboarding. And I'm just going to scroll down Enevoldson's list. I have it up on my other monitor here. Talking about the same 15 decks, I guess. There are a couple that he didn't touch on, but there's this is a pretty comprehensive list of most of the decks in Legacy. So let's start with Grixis Delver, and with this list, it would just be what, 2-path, 2 Judgment, cut 2 Revoker, Jailer, and Recruiter of the Guard. Let me pull over my little notepad here. Grixis Delver. Out. So this one's pretty simple. You don't have a lot of cards to bring in for this matchup because this matchup is in general relatively favored. And you cut Revoker because Revoker rarely has a card to name. It's occasionally the Grixis Delver has like a Grim Lavamancer or a Liliana of Last Hope or is it Staticaster? Those are all cards I've seen and like would not be super surprised if they played. But generally, Revoker is weak enough that you just want to cut them all because it's mostly a 2-1 for 1 or 2-1 for 2. Sorry. Jailer is generally a card that I try to cut against almost every True Knight Nemesis deck because Jailer is very, 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 very bad against True Knight Nemesis. And as well as Jailer's 4 mana against a deck that operates on like very small margins with dazes and such. It's also bad. Jailer's also kind of bad against Young Pyromancer, so there's like a huge downside in Jailer in the matchups where you're on the control side of things versus you are being on the aggression side, like against Grixis Control or Miracles. And then Recruiter is just generally kind of slow. You can keep in 1 mostly because you don't have other cards to bring in. If you have more cards to bring in, you can cut the other Recruiter. But in general, like you want to try to get lower to the ground because the way the Grixis Delver typically beats you is that they Delver you out or they cheese you with True Name because True Name's a hard card to beat. But I agree with everything Envoltson said about game plans. You are definitely the control deck. You have the inevitability, and you're generally favored in the matchup. One thing right off the bat, I guess that I disagree with is he mentions Dismember here, right? Does he mention Dismember here? Oh no, he mentions Dismember in the Blue-Red Delver matchup, I think. The next one. Oh, here we go. Yeah, he doesn't board in Dismember against Blue-Red Delver. We'll get to that in a bit. If I knew I only played against Delver decks, I would just play 2 Path to Exile, but Path is worse in the Mirror, Maverick, Aggro Loam, and Elves, so I don't have that luxury. And I don't agree with that very much because, A, I think Path is better than Dismember against 4-color Loam, specifically. And B, I think you are more likely to play against a bunch of Delver decks than the Mirror and Maverick and Elves, and I'm definitely not considering Elves a lot in my sideboarding decisions, and, like, the Mirror and Maverick, like, you can try to tech for the Mirror and Maverick specifically with stuff like Dismember, but I'm just, like, generally not a fan of it, and, like, Path to Exile is great. Path to Exile is really good against Delver decks as well, because obviously it's totally free, they don't have any basics. Blue-Red Delver has basics, obviously, but it's still being able to answer any creature and not taking 4 damage is huge. Yeah, Lomer Boy in chat. Yeah, I do think I agree. 4-color Loam definitely goes for their basic forest early on if possible, and being able to path like big knights is important. You didn't miss the Miracles discussion, Darkview. We just started talking about the same 15 decks that Envoltson is talking about. You considered fighting your opponent's card advantage by proactively putting yourself down a card and tempo. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that one, Patrick. I have some words about that one. Anyway, so Grixis Delver, it's like pretty cut and dry. It is a matchup that is as old as like New Age Legacy is, like post Innistrad Legacy essentially, because the format really changed with Innistrad block. And obviously, like, he gave us Delver and Thalia, which created Delver and, like, made Death and Taxes a real deck. So, as long as Delvers and Thalias have been being cast, this matchup has, like, existed in one way or another, the various Delver matchups, and I think it's generally just favored for Death and Taxes, so don't, like, consider it with your sideboard too heavily. Anyway. Blue-Red Delver, I think, is the exact same sideboarding? What, 2 Path, 2 Judgment? Yeah, it seems about right. What does he board in differently? He boards in Canonist and Prelate, neither of which I really have. So his sideboard has Canonist and Prelate in kind of the spot because he doesn't have Chalice of the Voids because it's definitely more of an experimental card. But he's not playing Chalice of the Woods in his list. He's playing Canonist and Prelate, which are totally fine to bring in against Blue Red Delver. I would if I had them, and I would probably cut like the other Recruiter, the Mirren Crusader, the Walking Ballista, depending on the build. So it's tough because Blue Red Delver is very customizable, and this is one of the first things that I didn't like about what Enevoldson had to say about the Blue Red Delver matchup in terms of he cuts Sword of Fire and Ice, which seems like absolutely mental to me. Like Sword of Fire and Ice, yes, I agree. If you can 100% guarantee your Blue Red Delver opponent isn't playing True Name, it's totally fine to cut because it's the worst of your 3 equipments. GTA just does the killing creatures job better, and Batter Skull, like being a brick wall against ground attackers and gaining you a bunch of life, is great. You typically want to fetch Sword of Fire and Ice last if you're not concerned about True Name Nemesis, but True Name Nemesis is a really scary card. And I think the matchup is good enough that you can hedge and you want to keep Sword of Fire and Ice, unless you like know deck lists and you know that they're not on True Names. I think you have other cards in your deck that you can cut enough that you don't really you don't have to cut Sword, which is your best way to fight a card like True Name. But anyway, generally the matchup plays out even more aggressively. It's like Blue Red Delver is probably just the most aggressive deck. It just has more bolts and tries to kill you faster with like prowess threats, haste threats, prowess haste threats, that sort of thing. So generally, it's just even more important to be able to weather the early game. This is a matchup where you can afford to play around days less than Grixis Delver, because it generally just has faster starts, and a lot of the times you just need to play into it more. But in general, you're probably favored. Post-board, you have to play around artifact removal, which is another reason, like, keeping the 3rd equipment is nice, because they board in Shattering, or Smash to Smithereens. I always want to say Shattering Spree, but the card I'm always thinking of is Smash to Smithereens. All the Shatter effects just have, like, the same fucking name. But anyway, this matchup feels also very good. Probably better than Grixis Delver. It depends on if they're on True Names, but generally, like, True Name is, like, the card you lose to the most in every Delver matchup ever, so if this is... And Grixis always has True Name. Blue Red sometimes has True Name, so I think it's generally better for you. They also don't get access to, like... I guess their hate is generally worse. They have, like, Electrickery and stuff, rather than, like, Marsh Casualties, or Liliana of the Last Hope, or Dread of Night. They don't get the black hate, they have red hate, which is generally easier to deal with. Your Mother of Runes are better at fighting it, that sort of thing. Let's talk about Blue-Black Shadow next. I'm literally just scrolling down Enevoldson's sideboard guide to talk about the matchups. So this one's a little bit tricky because I'm still not confident that I know what I want to be doing against Shadow. I'm still testing Chalice of the Void on the play, but I'm going to more or less pretend that, like, I don't want Chalice, I guess, because Chalice is definitely still experimental if you want it on the play. 100% never board it on the draw. I think it's, like, really bad on the draw, but there's a chance you want it on the play because they're very, very, very one-drop heavy, including most of their threats besides Gurmag. But that's a discussion for, like, if I ever get to the point where I test heavily against Shadow and figure out if I actually want Chalice on the play or not. But anyway, this is probably something that changes the in and outs on the play versus on the draw. But I think the cards coming in are probably always the same. You're going to be Judgment and Path because they're basically a Delver deck. Judgment and Path are, like, at a premium here, too. They don't play any basics. Like, exiling removal is good against, like, Liliana of Last Hope and such. And their threats are all individually pack a better punch, but they're never, like... Their threats are never 2-for-1s. Like, you can't Judgment a Young Pyromancer very effectively, but Judgment a Gurmag Angler or Death Shadow all the same. Also, Plow is great, obviously, against the Death Shadow deck. Also, bring in Relic Order, and I think I bring in Recruiter. Let me do the sideboard mapping here on the outs. This is gonna, like I said, this is super, like, train of thought stuff, so apologies if this isn't super consistent. This is me actively, like, forming my opinion of certain things, like, while I So generally, you want to be cutting your, like, really, your white X ones is generally what I try to cut. You shave moms. I liked Envoldson's, like, cutting Thalia's on the draw. Thalia's, like, pretty weak. So you have, like, 5 cards to bring in here. It's probably, like, 2 Mom, 2 Wisp, 1 Thalia on the draw. Or on the play. Oh, no. This is on the play. So on the... Yeah. So this is one of the matchups. I guess this is the start of Envoldson, like, sideboarding out Aether Vial in, like, 40% of his matchups, which just... I'm not in on that, like, on that wavelength, on that brainwave. For basically all of my Death and Taxes playing career, you never cut vials except for, like, against Nick Fit. So I'm definitely not of the... I don't have the expertise enough to say whether or not, like, boarding out, like, shaving the vial like he does is something that, like, I want to consider, because I just, like, I'm so vehemently against it. Like, by, like, just basically how I've always played. And Vial is just a really good card all the time. And yes, it's bad if, like, you draw your Vial on turn 18 against the deck that, like, tries to him you and, like, counterspell you and stuff like that. But also, like, playing Vial on turn 1 against the him counterspell, like, tempo deck is also really, really good. So I generally err on keeping them all in, because it's just a good card. But maybe one day I'll try out Envoldson's school of thinking a little bit more. And see where that takes me. He boards in, what, Path, Judgment, Dismember, Karn, Ballista, and Needle? Yeah, Needle? Oh, yeah, Lily on the Last Hope. That makes sense. But, on the draw, I probably just cut, like, 4 Thalia and 1 Wisp. This is generally, like, pretty flexible. I'm mostly in for just, like, cutting as many white X1s as I can for this matchup because of stuff like Dread of Night and Lily on the Last Hope, but especially Dread of Night is a card that they have very commonly. And Thalia is just really slow on the draw, and a lot of your cards you're boarding in are actually non-creature spells that are very important. So, like, your equipment is clunkier with Thalia, your 6 Plows and Council's Judgment are harder to cast and such. But I can see, like, keeping in Wisps and, like, cutting more Moms, or keeping in Moms, cutting more Wisps, depending on what your playstyle is, how you feel the matchup goes, but generally, I'm a fan of just, like, shaving Moms, Thalias, and Wisps in this matchup at all times. Magical Christmas Land, thank you for the follow. Appreciate it. Anyway. Oh yeah, I scrolled. The next line after the sideboarding thing for Blue-Black Shadow is hedge against Dread of Night. Which is, yes, 100% that's what you want to be doing in the Death Shadow matchup. Just, you want to be cutting your white X1s because Dread of Night is a absolutely devastating card. You want to, like try to increase your chance of beating it as much as possible. Because that is one of the easiest ways to lose. Anyway. That being said, Recruiter still, like, it's slow and clunky, but it also finds some of your best cards in the matchup. Mirran Crusader, Palace Jailer, like, Ballista if need be. Revoker if you're getting, like, mauled by a Last Hope. Been taking out Thalia's play or draw and just ready to fight over Liliana / Plow. Yeah, that's fair. I could see just, like, cutting all the Thalias on the play or the draw. Thalia's really nice, like, if you just slam it turn 2 on the play and it doesn't get dazed. It tends to be very, very good. Like, but I definitely wouldn't fault someone for just cutting all the Thalias on the play or the draw. But definitely cut Thalias on the draw because I think Thalia is a lot weaker there. What's the next deck? Eldrazi. So he just goes over Eldrazi aggro. He doesn't really talk about post, but he kind of lumps post in towards the end. I think he talks about, like, Oblivion Sower and Ulamog, which aren't exclusively in the post decks, because there is this, like, medium Eldrazi deck floating around that, like, one GP Shizuoka or something. It was, like, a really weird hybrid deck that was, like, stompy, but it had like a bigger top end. So I guess we'll just talk about Stompy, and I'll see where my train of thought takes me in regard to, like, post there are any significant differences. So obviously, this matchup is a lot about cutting your bad cards more than bringing in good cards, because you have straight up 9 cards that suck in this matchup, and you generally don't have 9 cards to bring in. Whoops. Out. 4 Mom, 1 Prelate, and then, like, some number of Thalia, and this number of Thalia, like, fluctuates specifically depending on how many cards you have to board in versus Eldrazi, because you don't have 9 cards all the time, and if you don't, you're leaving in some Thalias, because it's okay. So it's probably minimum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards. Sometimes the bigger decks I'll board in Cataclysm. I don't fault, and I'll talk about the Containment Priest, which Envoldson brings in. But let's start with so we'll just say, since I'm only putting in 6-ish cards, we'll put 1 with a question mark by it. So, anyway, let's talk about Eldrazi. So Eldrazi, obviously, Mom's horrible. Mom is really bad against the deck of Alcolos cards. In Game 1, sometimes you can, like, play around Dismember with it, but, like, it's generally not worth keeping it just to try to fight Dismembers. Sanctum Prelate, obviously very, very clunky against a deck that doesn't have a lot of non-creature spells. Sometimes you leave it against Post, but that's, like, a different archetype at this point, because, like, turning off All Is Dust or, like, Ugin or whatever can be important. And then Thalia, while its taxing effect, it ranges from medium to actively, like, detrimental, because sometimes it taxes your equipment, or, like in the Death Shadow match, it taxes your equipment, taxes your removal at a big cost. Thalia with equipment is very good on defense, or just like Thalia with Caracas, or Thalia with another first striker like a Mirran Crusader. These cards are good on defense. Thalia with holding a GT can block a Thought-Knot Seer and just straight up kill it. Or attack into a Thought-Knot Seer if it doesn't have Summoning Sickness and such. Or Thalia with a sword can just, like, block a Thought-Knot Seer, obviously, with 4 power. So, having First Strike definitely isn't no text. Envoldson brings in Containment Priest because he, too, does not have enough cards to board in against Eldrazi. And I don't fault him because it's okay. Like, it is a Flash 2/2 with almost no other text. It does combo with Flicker Wisp to kill your opponent's creatures. It also turns off your Aether Vials, which is bad, but sometimes, like, curving Containment Priest into Flicker Wisp on the Reality Smasher can definitely do something. And maybe that's correct. I don't hate it. I would definitely be open to it if you were, like, if you have a bunch of Thalias left in your deck, you could swap a Thalia for Containment Priest, and, like, I wouldn't bat an eye. Containment Priest is probably fine. Thalia is fine. Like, neither of that decision, I don't think especially matters. It's just, like, another cute little thing you can do, because it's pretty unintuitive to put in Containment Priest versus the deck that it hoses 0 cards out of, but you do what you gotta do. And Cataclysm is a weird card, because it ranges from, like, really, really, really bad to good, depending on the type of Eldrazi, and obviously the board state. And I think it's hard to identify when you're playing as Eldrazi Stompy versus, like, the medium Eldrazi deck, but I think Cataclysm is kind of bad versus Stompy, but gets much better as the Eldrazi player's curve goes up. So, like, it's bad against Stompy, decent against, like, the medium deck, and then really, really good against Post. So obviously Eldrazi Post, your sideboard looks different because you 100% bring in Cataclysms, stuff like that. But against Stompy or the medium deck, I think it's in more of a gray area because it's hard to identify that. So I think I err on usually, like, not bringing them in if I have enough cards. I definitely wouldn't leave in 3 Thalias, though, so I might bring in, like, 1 Cataclysm, leave in 2 Thalias or something. Or bring in maybe the Containment Priest, leave in 2 Thalias. Or maybe just, like, leave in 1 Thalia and bring in a Cataclysm and a Priest or something. But generally, it's this matchup is a lot about cutting your bad cards for okay cards. Yeah. There are spots where Cataclysm can be good, but generally it's a tough card to cast because your opponent has so many like just big beefy cards. So Armageddoning both players and leaving them with a 5/5 is usually pretty dangerous. Or just stomping with Oblivion Sword and Ulamog. Yeah, that's generally like the more like medium deck because unless they're not playing like what was it, Grim Monoliths? Like the GP winning list was like Grim Monoliths and a Simian Spirit Guide, and then had like Oblivion Sword, Ulamog, and stuff. So it's just like really weird and hard to identify. So it's tough to like sideboard that one completely correctly, and again, unless you know deck lists. But generally, it's like okay. I wouldn't hate having Cataclysm, but you definitely have to like find a good spot for it. You need to be like decently in control of the board. You need to have like a guy and an equipment, or have a vial out to be able to like redeploy to the board post Cataclysm. And sometimes like killing off 2 or 3 of their creatures and leaving them with 1 is easier to deal with than just fucking dying. Eldrazi decks do whatever they want. Yeah, pretty much. Eldrazi decks are definitely like similar to like the turbo depths to slow depths. Eldrazi is definitely like a pretty flexible shell in terms of how fast or slow you want to go versus like how much grind potential you want. So sometimes it can be hard to identify, but we'll get to the turbo depth stuff too. What's next? Sideboarding for the mirror. Oh boy, the mirror. So let's talk about the mirror. So, obviously, you have 5 cards that straight up suck in this matchup, and that's Thalia and Sanctum Prelate. And a big thing that I try when I'm explaining like a lot of the stuff to explaining the mirror or similar matchups like the mirror to people is that if you're playing a card in your deck that has a symmetrical effect, and your opponent is also playing that card in your deck, chances are neither of you want it post-board. So, like, if you're a Thalia deck and your opponent is a Thalia deck, chances are neither of you want to be that deck. You don't want to be playing that card anymore post-board. Same with, like, Sanctum Prelate, stuff like that. Because, obviously, if you're playing a card with a symmetrical effect, your deck is trying to maximize being able to utilize it so it's unfair. Like Thalia. We don't play a lot of non-creature spells. We play, what, 11? 3 of which are equipments that can be cheated with Stoneforge, and the other 8 cost 1 mana. Thalia is a card that Death and Taxes is literally designed to use this card to beat up legacy decks that abuse a bunch of non-creature spells, specifically like taxing cantrips and stuff, attacking mana bases, that sort of thing. So when you're playing against the other deck that also has the same idea, you don't want to be on this card. So cut your Thalias and Thalia matchups, cut your Prelate and Prelate matchups, so on and so forth. But you usually have a lot more cards to bring in against this deck than you want, or maybe not a lot, but you usually have some number of cards more that you want to bring in than bring out. In this case, it's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards. So we need to cut 1 more card and bring in the same 6 that we brought in against Eldrazi, weirdly enough. Which I guess makes sense because they're both very creature-heavy matchups. So for this list, I would probably cut Crusader, just on first glance. Maybe a Caracas, because we're on the 24-land list. I don't have a lot of experience on the 24-land list, so I wouldn't mind shaving a Caracas. I know that I see Envolson does over on his sideboard guide as well. He only cuts the Caracas on the draw. That makes some sense. But we'll go with we'll cut in the Caracas, actually. I haven't played the 24-land list enough, but I definitely wouldn't mind going down to 23 and cutting, like, a legendary land in the mana-base heavy matchup. But anyway, this is another one where I got a question mark from Envolson's sideboard guide, where he cuts Sword of Fire and Ice in this matchup, which seems, like, crazy. Sword of Fire and Ice is a very good backup GTA, and the matchup can come down to who gets their GTA online first, like, a lot of the time. And sometimes they kill your GTA, or there's a Revoker on GTA, they Relic Ward your GTA, and you want a second thing to tutor with your Stoneforge Mystic. And that card is almost never Batterskull. Batterskull is really, really bad. Hey, Cafe Gret. Batterskull's bad. I would cut Batterskull before Sword of Fire and Ice like 100% of the time. I think the short list of what to cut, I was kind of hemming and hawing about the 6th card. I think the short list is cut Batterskull, cut Crusader, cut 3rd Caracas in this matchup. I think Sword of Fire and Ice is like much further down on the list. In terms, I would cut Remorseful Cleric before Sword. Maybe that's it. Fligr's really good. But Sword of Fire and Ice is really good. It's a good second GTA. I don't know why he cuts it. It seems like kind of crazy to me, because when your GTA has been answered, or both GTAs have been answered by a Revoker, having Sword of Fire and Ice and getting your card advantage and removal from that instead can definitely swing games. Otherwise, this matchup comes down to like two very, I think Envelson touches on it, yeah, win the sub-games in the match. This matchup comes down to two things. First is the equipment fight. Whoever gets GTA Online first wins, basically, especially pre-board, where you're missing a lot of answers for it. GTA is the most busted card in the matchup, and you can kill your opponent very easily if you just get your GTA Online first. The second thing is this game can be a grind. The mirror can take a million years. Both of you have these stupid board states because you have like 3 moms and 2 revokers on things, and just so the board state can be very grind. And a lot of the time, how you win that is with flyers. Whoever wins in the air can steal it. Flyers are really good. Flicker Wisp is nuts. And recruit Flicker Wisp chains are definitely how I beat my opponents a lot of the time in the mirror, especially when equipment aren't involved. You just go Recruiter, Flicker Wisp your Recruiter, go get another Wisp, Wisp the Recruiter, go get another Wisp, and you just like make squadron Wisps. And if your opponent doesn't have access to that, you can definitely just beat them down with 3-1s in the air. So generally, that's more or less how the mirror goes. Someone flattens the other person with equipment, or the games grind out a long time and you need to extract value, whether it's like getting Jailer out in like a board stally thing where you can protect the monarchy as well, or just winning the air with Recruiter for Wisp, for Wisp, for Wisp, for Wisp, or like recruiting, like finding a Ballista mowing down like your opponent's moms and being able to attack profitably with yours or something. Ballista's another key card in the mirror for sure. If you're not playing Ballista and you want to tech for the mirror, and you don't want to play something like Sword of Fire and Ice, Ballista's a very good card. Because oftentimes the games go really long, so you'll have just have a bunch of lands in play, so you just can cast a Ballista for 4 or whatever and just mow down your opponent's whole team. And if they don't have a kill spell for it, if they do have a kill spell for it, you kill a bunch of creatures and it dies. If they don't have a kill spell for it, you can just keep pumping it every turn and just act as like a very slow makeshift GTA sort of thing, being able to ping down creatures with low toughness. But anyway, sometimes the mirror is a shit show. Sometimes it's really fun and like really drawn out and really thought intensive. So I fluctuate on whether I hate it or I like it depending on the specific game. Sideboarding versus Storm. I'm just going to talk about Ant here. He talked about Test too, but the sideboarding versus Ant and Test changes a little bit. I don't know. I don't remember if he touches on that. No, he doesn't. Alright, so out and in. Storm, we have a lot of cards for Storm, so we need to figure out everything that comes in. So we have 1 Rip, 1 Relic Order, 1 Recruiter, can't spell Recruiter, brain isn't functioning. This one is 3 Chalice, but you don't always have 3 Chalice. 3 Chalice is like a little bit extreme right now, but I've been liking it a lot. So this is easily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards, and then some number of Council's Judgments. And its easy cuts are for Swords to Plowshares, the Ballista, the Jailer, this when I start cutting, the GTA, and then like probably 1 Wisp. Wisp has like pretty diminishing returns, and I think Wisp cut Mom. I like Mom's pretty important in this matchup. I think I'll get to that in a second. Mom is also kind of an combo with Chalice, but a lot of the time Chalice goes on 0 in this matchup anyway, and if your Chalice is on 1, you don't necessarily need the Mom all the time. So, question mark by Wisp, I guess. How you beat Brian's Hope of Kira. Well, first off, you're just like fucking dying to Tess. Tess is just a much worse matchup, and I think the only difference between Ant and Tess is, like, you don't bring in the Rip versus Tess. And I like the Judgments probably a little bit more against Tess. But anyway. So Storm is, Envolson nailed it when he talked about this matchup being this huge die roll. Because I've been raving about this since, like, Storm picked up post-Eternal Weekend and stuff, and everyone was playing Storm for a while, and I got really fed up with it. Because the matchup is such a coin flip. If you win the die roll, you're so much favored, because whoever wins game one, it becomes, like, it's so important. So if you happen to keep a hand with Thalia, and you're on the play against Storm, you just play Thalia on turn 2, and you win most of the time, then it's so much easier, because winning games on the draw versus Storm is really hard, because they are designed to go off before you hit your second land drop if they're on the play. Or maybe they, like, thought seize you once and go off on turn 3 or whatever, or leave up an Abrupt Decay or an Echoing Truth or whatever, kill your thing, that your hate card you played on turn 2, then go off. Is just a nightmare. But conversely, if you're on the play, Storm doesn't go off on turn 1 super often, so generally you have time to play your hate cards. Like, if you just get to play your Thalia on turn 2, or your Rest in Peace to slow them down from their, like, Past in Flames line. Cyrus considers D&T a good matchup. Cyrus is also, like, one of the fucking best Storm players in the world, so... Cyrus is, like, nuts at the deck, so, like, yeah, sure, Storm's a good matchup, or, like, D&T's a good matchup if you're Cyrus, but I think if you're the average Storm player versus the average Death and Taxes player, like, it's a lot more coin flippy. But someone like Cyrus could probably play circles around the average Death and Taxes player, so... I agree a lot heavily with Envolson that, like, this matchup is very, very, very die roll dependent. What does he say at the beginning? Something about a loaded dice? Rather than a sideboard, I would prefer to bring a loaded die to this particular matchup, as going first is the most important route to victory against Storm. I was laughing when I read that the first time. Because it's so true. Matchup's a shitfest. I hate the Storm matchup. It's just, like, not fun. But anyway... How hard is it to know you have a turn 2 heal? I don't think that's, like, the most important thing. Like, obviously, like, looking at your hand, oh, can I kill Death and Taxes before, like, they make a turn, like, before they have a turn 2 play is definitely a trait that's pretty easy to recognize when you have a deterministic kill against a deck that doesn't have counterspells. But I think that good Storm players are definitely, like, can acknowledge what, like cantripping decisions, or what happens if you don't kill them before turn 2. How are you fighting against that? How are you leveling your sideboard cards and that sort of thing? I think there is definitely merit to a good Storm player being better in a matchup than a bad Storm player, and I'm like, that's an obvious thing to say, but I don't think that, like, D&T is, like, a super good matchup for Storm or anything. I definitely think that it's very, very coin flippy, and if D&T takes game 1, it's a lot harder for them to win, because you get to be on the play for game 3 after you inevitably lose game 2. Anyway, so Judgment has a question mark next to it, before I get to, like, the rest of the specifics of that matchup. Judgment has a question mark because Dread Knight's a really scary card, but the number of Dread Knights that Storm plays fluctuates given, I don't know what the determination between Massacre and Dread Knight is for Storm players. I'm not an experienced Storm player, but if they have Dread Knights, you want your Judgments. If they don't have Dread Knights, you want them a lot less. So generally, sometimes I hedge and I'll bring in, like, 1 and cut a second Wisp or something. But it's, like, kind of a judgment call, no pun intended. And Judgment has some spots where it's okay. A lot of times they'll play out their LEDs or petals before your turn 2, so you, like, play out your Thalia and they don't get taxed later, because the Storm count isn't super important. So you can sometimes snipe, like, an LED or a petal with a Judgment, and it's definitely not nothing. Or against Tess, you can hit their Chromoxes, but Tess, you're much less likely to be casting Council's Judgment regardless. But anyway... Talking about how coin flip the match is, I think this is one of the matchups where I really, really, really like Chalice to try to hedge the matchup more in our favor, because Chalice is one of the few cards you can play on turn 1 to trip up Storm. The matchup is a lot of getting to your second land drop, so being able to, like, run out Chalice on 0 on turn 1 to turn off petals and LEDs from their deck is pretty pivotal, I think. Being able to Chalice them so you can slow them down enough so you can land your Rips and your Thalias and your Sanctum Prelates and whatnot. So I think Chalice definitely tilts the scale, maybe a little bit more for Death and Taxes, because I think just having Aethersworn and Sanctum Prelate like he does in the sideboard, just having more stuff to play on turn 2 and turn 3 doesn't matter a whole lot. It just increases your density of hate cards you can play on turn 2, which is, like, generally how you win when you win game 1, but trying to hedge like wins on the draw or like wins against like heavier hate. Like Chalice is really good against Storm. That's all I'll say. I think it's definitely cool and innovative tech, and I think I like it a lot more than Canonist. Back when 2 Canonists in the sideboard was basically a staple. There are definitely matchups where Chalice is worse than Canonist, obviously. It's not all upside, but... And sometimes when you get to that stage of the game, Chalice on 1 can also be just a very important hate card. Like being able to Chalice on 1 is much better against their deck than Chalice on 0, but you don't always have that luxury. But Chalice on 1 can turn off their Chain of Vapors and stuff. Plays better versus Echoing Truth. Echoing Truth's really good versus the second Chalice. I don't think that's like a huge thing, because we already have a lot of diversification of hate cards between like Rest in Peace, Surgical, Thalia, Chalice of the Void, Remorseful Cleric, whatever, Sanctum Prelate. I think the diversion of hate cards is fine. Like, you can recruit for other things. You don't need to recruit for the Aethersworn Canonist to lock them out. It's definitely not nothing, though. Obviously, Echoing Truth is really good against multiple Chalice of the Voids. I think that's why people are on more Echoing Truth than anything else right now. Because Chalice of the Void is one of the biggest threats of, like, things you need to bounce. I mean, it's also, yeah, sure, it's relevant versus Phoenix, but, like, a lot of cards are relevant versus Phoenix. Like, having a Chalice of the Void in the first place is also good against Phoenix if you get to a second mana source. So, Canonist instead of Chalice, the third Chalice of Void is fine. I've done that. The tournament I won the Volcanic Island with a couple weeks ago, I literally played, I think it was this list, except this Ancient Tomb was a Hallowed Spirit Keeper, and I was actually playing an Aethersworn instead of the third Chalice. So, like, third Chalice or Canonist instead of third Chalice, there we go, is totally fine if you want to do that. Like, it's fine. I like it well enough. I just really like Chalice of the Void right now. Especially against Miracles, which we will get to eventually. Anyway, let's move on from the Ant matchup, because fuck the Ant matchup. Black-green Depths. This is really just kind of a... Thought it was cool that Envolton boards Needle versus Ant. Yeah, I mean, like, it's less cool and more desperate, right? Like I talked about, turn 1 plays are important. So, like, having that minuscule chance of being able to trip them up with, like, turn 1 Needle your Delta and Stone Rain 4 lands in their deck, like, that's definitely something, but, like, if you have Needle, I wouldn't hate boarding it in, but it's definitely more of a desperation thing than, like, oh, this is cool and neat. Like, it's more, we really want turn 1 interaction for this matchup to try to hedge it in our favor. And that's why Chalice of the Void is just already so good. Because it allows you to play a not shitty card that also does that. Anyway. Depths. So Depths is a bit of a sideboarding mess for the same reason Eldrazi was. Is that Depths ranges from, like, Turbo Depths to Slow Depths, and there's, like, Medium Depths in there, and, like, some of your sideboarding decisions kind of fluctuate depending on a lot of those factors, but generally, it's not a huge deal. Let's talk about what we board in. Judgment's great. Path is great. Surgical is great. Although less great against Slow Depths, obviously, because they usually have alternate win cons. Sometimes you don't want to draw the Surgicals. Recruiter is great. Relic Order is great. I think that's it. Oh, looks like it, right? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah. Finally, 2 cards with the same 60. Play second Jailer over Cleric and Factory with the extra planes. Yeah, I mean, the Factory versus Planes thing is a lot of preference. And I don't hate second Jailer, but I'm just, like, not a fan. Second Jailer does... I guess I'll talk about second Jailer when we get to, like, Grixis Control and Miracles. Because I like second Jailer a lot more in the matchups where Monarchy is unstable. Like against the Baleful Strix decks and the Snapcaster Mage decks. But anyway. So what do we cut versus Depths? I hate Thalia in this matchup. Thalia is, like, really clunky. Probably just cut all my Thalias. It's also bad against Dread Knight, which is a card that they pretty relatively commonly board in. I think I cut either GT or Sword, but for the life of me, I haven't played against Depths in so long. I like leaving in Battered Skull to hedge against like Liliana, because sometimes you just need like a big clunky threat to try to beat up that plan. I guess Prelate sucks. Prelate's pretty bad. Like, you can put it on 2, and it's okay, because it turns off their Abrupt Decays and their... They play 4 Bob, 3 Safekeeper, 4 X-Mage. Well, yeah, but I think Sword is just generally does a similar job, and it also clocks them a lot better than GTA does. Yeah, Ballista's good in this matchup. Ballista killing, like, Safekeepers and Bobs and Hex Mages is really good, and I've done all of those things before. But I think GTA is just, like, kind of a bad sort of Fire and Ice in that regard, because it's just, like, worse at clocking. And it doesn't draw you cards. What else do we cut, though? This is, what, 8 cards? Broker's fine. Mom's fine. Val's fine. I wouldn't hate, like, cutting a land, but I don't know what land you would cut. What does Envolson do? Shaves Stoneforge? Yeah, I'm shaving 1 Stoneforge and equipment. That's for sure. Just the question of Sword of Fire and Ice versus GTA, and I'm honestly not sure. I haven't played against Turbo Depths nearly enough, and I don't think that decision matters a whole lot. Yeah, both Fire and Ice and GTA, I think, are, like, okay, not great. I think Fire and Ice is also a lot better fighting their, like, post-board plans of Liliana Last Hope and stuff. Yeah, GTA is, like, better if they have a bot, but, like, you also, like, can't attack with some of your creatures into a Vampire Hexmage if you have a GTA, and you can with a Sword of Fire and Ice. There are definitely upsides and downsides to both, but I definitely don't fault, like, GTA over Sword of Fire and Ice. But I think you do want to cut one of them. That's 7 cards. I'm probably cut Knave. He cuts Palace Jailer? That seems nuts. There's so many, like, useless little shitters that they play to exile. Or you sometimes just exile the Merit Lage, just as another answer. And drawing cards is super important. Palace Jailer seems great. I don't even know what I would cut. I feel like I just want to cut, like, a Plains or an Ancient, too. I haven't played a lot with a 24 land list. I think, assuming I'm on a 23 land list, with the Spirit Keeper that I usually like, cutting the Spirit Keeper is, like, a snap decision. His Mirror Crusader's not great. I don't hate cutting Mirror Crusader, I don't hate cutting land. Mirror Crusader, obviously, pro their deck. Yeah, great. But that's not really the axis you need to be fighting this matchup on. It's usually just, like, prevent them from doing anything and kill them with whatever you have left over. So I don't think I don't think Crusader's super important. It does help fighting Liliana the Last Hope and stuff. So there is that. There is definitely upside to still having Crusader in your deck. I think I would cut a land. I think I'm just, like, shaving up Plains or something here. This is not really a matchup where you need 24 lands, but this is a matchup where your, like, Mana Denial and your Caracas are both very important, so you can't really shave... You obviously can't shave any of those. Tomb isn't spectacular, but it might just be better than a Plains. Maybe it's actually cut Tomb over Plains, because you are boarding in some number of white spells, so being able to more consistently cast Council's Judgment and Flicker Wisp and stuff seems like it's pretty relevant. He also just, like, cuts a second Stoneforge, which maybe that's okay, because Stoneforge just, like, doesn't matter a whole lot. So maybe just 2 Stoneforge, 2 equipment's okay. How about that? I don't hate that plan. Again, this is all, like, stream of thought stuff. This is definitely not cut and dry, super meticulous thought out. But I don't hate cutting just 2 Stoneforges and cutting in equipment. Equipment is not generally how you want to be fighting this matchup. But sometimes they have, like, a Liliana the Last Hope, they have a grindy plan, and you just need to go grab your equipment to try to beat it. So being able to, like, recruit for it is also important. Currently playing as 4C pile and getting got by 5/6 Tarmogoyfs. Seems not great. Tarmogoyf is kind of a relic of a bygone era. But and sometimes you get got. But you have, like, ways to fight Tarmogoyfs. Mirror Crusader, equipment, Council's Judgment still, but yeah. Shit happens. Anyway, moving on. Black-Red Reanimator. This one is, I think, pretty easy. I think I've done, like, the exact same sideboarding, because I play against this deck a lot. Out. Let me see if I can just do it. Because we're boarding in 13 cards, so it's what? Cut. 4 Mom. 4 Stoneforge. 3 Equipment. 1 Crusader. And 1 Ballista. Yeah, looks right. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yep, that tracks. And you bring in I'm tempted to type everything except Cataclysm, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Wait, did I miscount? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Did I miss something? Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Am I like super blind? Oh, I have 1 judgment, not 2. There we go. Found it. Anyway, so this matchup is all about damage control. Game 1 is really, really hard, and you need to be able to survive to games 2 and 3, because sometimes you get to steal game 1, but it's not super likely, especially in the total blind if you keep any hand without being on the play and having fast hate. Sometimes you, like, cheese wins by having Karakas in your opener, and they, like, have a suboptimal reanimation threat. They go for, like, Iona, and you have Karakas, or they go for Grizzlebrand. They go for, like, reanimate Grizzlebrand, so they only draw 7 once, and then they, like, brick on the second threat, and you Karakas the Grizzlebrand or whatever. But generally, this matchup is all about stopping what your opponent is doing, and you just can win with a fucking wet paper bag at that point. This list currently is citing all the moms, but I used to have a slightly different plan when I wasn't boarding in Chalices. But I've definitely, I think on stream at some point, literally took a reanimator opponent from like 15 to 0 with a single Mother of Runes in play, which is like a rest in peace out, because I drew like lands and vials, and my opponent just drew cards that didn't matter. But anyway, not a lot to say about the red-black reanimator matchup, other than just, like, it's really dangerous, especially on the draw. Like, your hate is very slow, and they are designed to go off as fast as possible, and you only really have surgical to try to stop it. Also, Chalice of the Void is a pretty medium card in this matchup. It can be good if you find a spot for it. If they don't have a card in the grave, if they don't have a fatty in the graveyard, and you can Chalice on 1, it almost completely locks them out of that plan. Because they like can't, they have almost no cards that actually put a card in their graveyard. Watch out for Entomb in response to Chalice on 1, because that's really bad for you. But generally, if you get a Chalice on 1, the only ways they can make a reanimation target is by discarding to hand size or by unmasking themselves. Or occasionally they have Collective Brutality, but that's like very uncommon at this point. Watch out for good luck, have fun. But anyway, sometimes I'll just run out Chalice on 0, just to, like, hopefully stall them a turn, like, trip up a Lotus Petal. Like, if my hand is, like, Chalice on 0, rest in peace, I'll just play Chalice on 0 and hope to get there. Just to, like, hope that that trips them up. But generally, Chalice is a card that just, like, isn't super great, but it has its spot, and it's better than, like, a random idiot. Like, it's going to win you more games than Meteor and Crusader is going to. Collective Brutality is rare because it's garbage. Yeah, I mean that's true, but some people play garbage. I played against Collective Brutality in Red Black like maybe last week, 2 weeks ago. I recall it like being pretty recent, but some people play it, so it's just like it's a card to have maybe at the back of your mind. But anyway, this game is just a lot about redundancy because they are a Thoughtseize deck. They're an unmasked Thoughtseize, whatever. Like, strip your hate, and that's why I like the third Recruiter in here. Envelson cuts a Recruiter, right? And I don't love that. He also doesn't have a second, like, thing to go tutor up, but even then. He also cuts 2 Aether Vials in this matchup, which I just cannot fathom. Like, what? In what world is 2 the correct number of Aether Vials to have in your deck? It just seems very weird to me. But generally, you can try to stall the game. A way you can win is just, like, if you get Vial into Thalia on the play, and you have, like, a Recruiter, you can go 3rd land Recruiter into your 2-drop, your Contagion Priest or your Remorseful Cleric. Or sometimes they, like, just Thoughtseize you a bunch, and they don't have, like, the super fast kill, so if you lead turn 1 Vial, you can get to the turn 3 Recruit your hate card and put your hate card in off the Vial. This is a matchup where Fairy Macabre is much better than Surgical Extraction because you don't need the Vial for that. You can just straight up 3-mana Recruit Fairy Macabre, but I think Fairy Macabre is also very, very bad and narrow, so like don't really play it unless you have no other Graveyard Hate creatures. I think Death Attack should almost always have at least one Graveyard Hate creature in the 75 because Recruit of the Guard is so strong. But anyway, sometimes you have to fight on the axis of kill their threats, and that's why you have, like, 4 Plows, 2 Paths, 2 Council's Judgment. Occasionally they'll have Inkwell Leviathan or Archetype of Endurance, cards that you need to Council's Judgment away. Iona, you can beat with, like, Aether Vial or Caracas. I've definitely beat people that aggressively go for Iona because you just Vial in Recruiter, get Palace Jailer, next turn Vial in Jailer, eat it. I don't think Iona is super good. Sometimes it gets you. Like, if they Thoughtseize you and see your hand super soft to an Iona and has, like, a bunch of Plows, they just won't go for Grizzlebrand. They'll just try to Iona you. But generally, Iona is less scary than something like Grizzlebrand. Tidespout Tyrant. Not Tidespout Tyrant. That one's, like, medium. But Inkwell Leviathan. That one's really hard to beat as well. Envelson leaves in a single Stoneforge Mystic and a Batterskull, so you can, like, recruit the Stoneforge and Stoneforge the Batterskull to sometimes you try to race or, like, have a better clock. I don't love that plan. I don't think a lot of games are won based on, like, a Batterskull being able to race a Chancellor of the Annex? Whatever, Chancellor. And, like, the ability to, like, just draw your Batterskull and it being, like, an actual completely dead card doesn't really track with me. The best plan for Siona is don't get Iona, I have Caracas, and Surgical Grizzlebrand, they entomb for that. I mean, fair. But anyway, you can generally win if you manage to get your Graveyard Hate stuff going. Like, you don't need... They're a, what, 12-land deck or something? Yeah, 12 lands. If you can, like, Surgical their play and then, like, Thalia port them or Wasteland them or whatever... or just get a Rest in Peace in play, or get a Containment Priest or a Remorseful Cleric going. Like, generally, if you answer them 1 or 2 times, then they're, like... Generally, if you answer them 1 time, you have enough time to kill them, and, like, definitely give you enough time to find the second answer. It's just, like, not dying in the first 2 turns of the game. They're, like, super, super, super important. Anyway. Yeah, his section on Red-Black is, it's the fast Grizzlebrand that gets you. Accurate. Those are the games you lose, where they just make a turn on Grizzlebrand and draw a billion cards, and you're just dead. Sneak and Show. This is one that had some interesting tech, which I'll get to in a second, which I actually, like, don't hate, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but we'll talk about it in a second. So what comes in here is 2 Judgment, for sure. The Recruiter. The Relic Warder. The Priest. And the Chalices. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. And the outs are 4 Plows, Ballista, Crusader, And, Remorseful Cleric. Wait, is it 7? Is it 7 and 7? 8. Oh, GJ. GJ sucks. GJ is real bad. So Envelson, what does he do here? Cuts all the plows, cuts 2 Stoneforgers, cut GJ, cut Brightling, and shave a mob. Yeah, that's fine. I don't disagree with any of that plan. He also doesn't have a lot of like weird, like one-off tech cards like Crusader and Cleric to cut. He cuts the GJ, shaves 2 Stoneforgers, which is fine. Like if you want to like keep in a Stoneforge instead of, or like cut a Stoneforge instead of the Recruiter, or not Recruiter, the Crusader, definitely not unreasonable. But anyway, Evelson does something a little weird. He boards in Cataclysm in this matchup, which I wanted to talk about a little bit before I get to how the matchup goes. Or I guess I should talk about it after how the matchup goes. Generally, the cards that matter in this matchup are Rashad Port, Thalia, and Sanctum Prelate, and to a much lesser extent, Wasteland. Most of the other cards in your deck just flat out don't matter, like, or are very secondary or tertiary to the plan. And the plan is, don't let them cast Show and Tell because they will just Omniscience Emrakul you and you will die. I think Sneak and Show players at this point have learned that you should almost never put in a Grizzlebrand or an Emrakul unless off Show and Tell, unless you like are 100% certain that it's going to pay off. I don't think I've been Show and Tell Emrakul or Grizzlebranded in a long time. They just always seem to Omniscience you, because that is that's a good plan against Death and Taxes. Because Death and Taxes can beat an Emrakul or can beat a Grizzlebrand, but they almost never beat Omniscience. So anyway, your board cards are Thalia, Port, and Prelate for that exact reason. Because Thalia and Port help plan A, which is, like, don't let them get to enough mana to cast Show and Tell. You need to keep taxing them and tax them so they can't cast it. Wasteland their Volcanics or their Soul Lands if that's what they have. But, like, Thalia and Port are your #1 plan. And in the behind the scenes, you are trying to get your Recruiter or your Prelate, because Prelate on 3 is just huge. Grizzlebrand for draw 14 is a thing sometimes, in which case Revoker over Wisp to buy time is something to keep in mind. Yeah, definitely, like, if your plan is, I flat out can't beat Omniscience, so what's the next worst thing they can put in off Show and Tell? It's generally, like, put in Revoker to name Grizzlebrand and stuff like that. But generally, if it's like, oh, I have lethal if I can put in Wisp their Omniscience, attack, cast another Wisp on my Wisp to Wisp their Omniscience during the next turn, and if they don't have a counterspell, that's generally, like, a better plan. Especially if you already have, like, a Caracas, obviously. Like, their Grizzlebrand isn't very good. But it's always something to keep in mind. But I think Omniscience is, all like, very, very much at the forefront plan A for them. But anyway, Mana Now is huge. Getting Prelate on 3 is huge. Game 1, Prelate on 3 plus, like, a Revoker on Sneak Attack is just basically game. Game 2, like, post-board games, sometimes they'll have more answers, like Sudden Shock or Pyroclasm or stuff like that, to deal with a Sanctum Prelate, but often, especially if they're on the Wish builds, they won't have a lot, or, like, I guess a Braid goes in that 2-drop category. But the end state of the game wants to be Prelate on 3 and, like, a Revoker or something to answer a Sneak Attack. If they only have, like, one red source, you can just have a Caracas and be, like, porting their other red sources and stuff. Porting or Wastelanding. But Prelate's huge. Prelate is huge in this game. If you can get to Prelate on 3, you're generally, like, pretty safe. Especially with, like, post-board, if you have a Mom in play or Sword on the Sanctum Prelate, then you're pretty golden. In that vein, Envelson brings in Cataclysm in this matchup, which is a little bit unintuitive, but, like, maybe I don't hate it, because you don't have a lot of good cards in this matchup. Like I said, your important cards are Thalia, Port, Sanctum Prelate, and Recruiter for Sanctum Prelate. And then, like, a lot of your other cards, like, matter a lot. So, like, maybe boarding in Cataclysm to just be like, oh, I'm going to cast this as soon as I get to 4 mana and just, like, double Stone Rain my opponent. And even, like, triple Stone Rain yourself in the process, and just be like, okay, I'm going to blow up 2 of their lands and hope that my creature can limp across the finish line here, or I have a Violent play and I can redeploy a little bit. And, like, maybe that's not crazy. I don't hate the idea of boarding in Cataclysm here. I don't love it because obviously it's a 4-mana sorcery in a matchup where I already talked about how good Thalia is, so like it's a 5-mana sorcery all the time. But if you can stall them out with stuff like Thalia and Port, generally Sneak and Show has to hit a lot of land drops to keep up with that. If they don't fall behind on land drops, then you will just hex them out of the game anyway. So if they're hitting a lot of land drops trying to get to that mass to cast Show and Tell or whatever, then like maybe Cataclysm's okay. I definitely don't hate it. Also, notably post-board, Leonin Relic Order is a big thing. You have a second important tutor target because you can put in Relic Order off of Show and Tell and exile their Omniscience, and they can only cast instants in response. So if they're on the Wish build, sometimes they can try to go off in response and kill you, but if their plan is just Omniscience Emrakul you, Relic Order beats that. So Relic Order is definitely an important card to have in hand, and if you think I'm going to die next turn, and I can't put it Sanctum Prelate into play, then sometimes recruiting Relic Order is better because it stalls the Omniscience plan. Anyway. The title of his section about Sneak and Show is No Omniscience, No Cry. Love it. He also talks about surgical extraction down at the bottom, and like surgical extraction is okay if specifically you see or know they have intuition, but like if it's on Omnitel, intuition is a lot more common, so like I'll bring in surgicals, but I don't see intuition super often against Sneak, so I don't love bringing in surgical preemptively, but like if you win game 1 and game 2 you see an intuition, then like board in surgical, it's okay, it's not good, but anyway. I guess we'll talk about Elves. The bane of our existence. Elves is not a good matchup. Notably, Elves is also a matchup that I don't give a lot of credit in my sideboard plan for, because generally the plan is lose. But you do want to plan. Sometimes you beat Elves. I think I have like a actually decent win rate against Elves right now. I am 4-4 since the Deathrite ban. Played against it 8 times, but it's definitely not good. It's not even close to 4-4. I think in reality it's like a 1-7 matchup, maybe 2-6 matchup if I played against it 8 times. You have to get pretty lucky to win though. This is a matchup where I've gone back and forth on Cataclysm and Judgment a lot. Cut Thalia's, cut Jailer, cut Recruiter. Are you copy and pasting his? No, because you have a Grafdigger's Cage. Cutting a Recruiter and cutting Sophie seem like pretty psychotic. Out smile optimism. In. I love it. Yeah, pretty much. It's usually out, happiness, sideboard in, sadness. Sadness goes on the stack. But generally, yeah, cut all your Thalias. Thalia's bad. That's what he does. He doesn't have a cage in his deck, right? Yeah, just... Anyway, what? Cut Thalias. Yeah, go to lunch. Concede, go to lunch. It's not a good matchup. Cut... Skull sucks. Mom's okay. Jailer sucks. How many cards are we bringing in off the cuff? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Already cut 6. And I think I cut Cleric. It flies, but that's the only text that's relevant. Could probably also afford to cut a land. Cut like a Caracas in this matchup. Mom, I think, is okay enough, like even with the anti-synergy with Chalice. Just based on like sometimes you need to sometimes you have GTA but you can't punch through a Wirewood Symbiote and an Elf, or a Dryad Arbor and a Quarian Ranger. And Mom being able to pro green and guaranteeing you connect with your creature can be important, as well as protecting your Containment Priest or your I don't know, Sanctum Prelate or something from an Abrupt Decay or some such. Definitely Shaving Moms is probably not, like, the worst thing in the world. I'm not sure what I would cut after, like, to bring in some number of Judgment or Cataclysm, but Judgment and Cataclysm are also, like, kind of clunky. Cut, like, a land. Cut some Moms. I'll list it like that. I don't think you need, like... Yeah, I'd probably just cut a Caracas. Because Caracas just, like, doesn't matter at all. They're no more legendaries. Sometimes they'll have, like, a Leovold, but it's not super relevant. And then you can cut some Moms, depending on if you want to bring in Judgment or Cataclysm, but jury's out on that. I haven't tested extensively against Elves. I think Cataclysm is probably better than Judgment. I don't think they board in Progenitus often, because I don't think they need to. The Creator of Plan is very good. I don't hate Cataclysm, though, because sometimes if you manage to stall out the board state a little bit with, like, a Containment Priest or something in play, they can just get a lot of Elves in play, and you need to, like... And, like, wrathing the board and blowing up some of their lands can be important. So, Cataclysm doesn't suck. Judgment is, like, medium-ish. I don't think, like I said, I don't think they're really boarding in Progenitus a lot. And if they're natural ordering for something, I think a Hoof is going to kill you just about as badly as a Progenitus will. Spirit of the Labyrinth. Well, I mean, if you want, like, better tech cards versus Elves, you just want more Containment Priests or Ethos Horns, right? I don't think Spirit of the Labyrinth... Well, Spirit of the Labyrinth's fine in this matchup. It turns off the Glimpse side of their deck. I think if you wanted, like, just better cards, you could just play Containment Priest or Ethos Horn Canonist, because Canonist is very, very good against not Natural Order, and Containment Priest is very, very good against not Glimpse. Whereas Spirit is good against only Glimpse and bad against, like, their Natural Orders and their Greens and Zeniths and stuff. It doesn't turn off enough of... Like, it's good. I would bring it in or keep it in if I had it in my deck, but I think there are definitely, like, better cards. But anyway, Elves matchup, very, very bad. Post what's the play where you have a general D&T plat on the draw versus Forest Heritage Druid. The what's the play is pick up your cards and then go to your next match. But yeah, Elves is a very bad matchup. D&T is tweaked out to be a very, like, mana denial, anti-non-creature spell deck, and it's really bad against the Mana Dork creature deck, as it turns out. Thalia does not line up well against Llanowar Elves. Your cards do not line up well against spewing a bunch of Elves into play and then, like, Crater Hoofing you for 900 damage. It's just not how that matchup's gonna go. Plow, Stoneforge, get GTA, land, GTA, Plow, GTA with hit with GTA Revoker their hand, or hit with GTA Plow. The best plan is Plow their turn 1 play, turn 2 Stoneforge, turn 3 Ancient Tomb play, equip Stoneforge, they don't see it coming, and you get them with the GTA. And then you also need to, like, be wary of like Reclamation Sage, because I've definitely lost with GTA connection before. It's hard, but if they have the immediate, like, kill it next turn, then you can, like, kill 2 Elves and still lose. Anyway, so that's also the reason I still like Sword of Fire and Ice. Like, cut Battle Scroll because it's garbage, but Sword of Fire and Ice is, like, okay if they Abrupt Decay or, like, Reclamation Sage or GTA. Sometimes Sword of Fire and Ice can be a bad GTA, like it was, I was talking about, like, in the Death and Taxes matchup. Sometimes killing one creature and drawing a card is, like, good enough. And sometimes it's just, like, the backups to the backup plans, but generally, these decisions don't matter a whole lot, because you're just gonna fucking die. But your game plan is always GTA as fast as possible, clear scary cards like Heritage Druid, Wirewood Symbiote, stuff like that, with your removal spells, and pray that they can't answer your GTA, or, like, get a Vial on 3 to Flick Wisp your GTA in response to the Reclamation Sage, or set up a Sword of Fire and Ice to redeploy. Chalice of the Void is also a really good way to, like, try to cheese games. Sometimes they can't answer a Chalice of the Void, and their deck has a lot of 1-drops. Containment Priest is also a good way to cheese games. Sometimes they let you go all in on a natural order, like a big green sun or something, and you can just Priest, kill a thing. And it's just really good at sitting there and gumming up a lot of their plans. Anyway, Elves, bad matchup. Dodge. That's your best plan. Just don't play against it. Miracles. Alright, we finally got there. Alright. I don't know why I put out first, because I keep typing in first, because I need to know how many cards I'm bringing in before I know how many cards I'm cutting. But that's the format of what I'm typing at this point, so I'm going to stick to it. Alright, miracles. Three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Yeah, it's always 8 cards against miracles. And what I've been doing recently is... So, a couple things here is that this... So I like to leave in some number of sources of plowshares based on how many mentors they have, and I've been seeing a lot of mentors recently, so I think generally I err on keeping in some number of sources of plowshares, generally around 2. Clearly you cut a vial since you're going to Tomb Chalice so you dodge the Nombo. But yeah, but sometimes you go Tomb double Aether Vial, and that's a combo, so we can't cut the vial. I know you're meaning, but... Anyway. He cuts a Crocus over a Wasteland? I guess I don't hate it, but... Yeah, like, the first Crocus is really good if they're not, like, back to basicsing you. One plow, just try it, yeah. I mean, that's Envol's plan with the cutting the Aether Vial every time. Like, it's okay to cut your Aether Vials if you just, like, draw the first one every game, right? But anyway, Mentors have been sticking more and more as just, like, a very good way to clean up games very fast. As Miracles, it's a very good threat, and very scary, especially as Death and Taxes. It's the card I probably lose to the most against Miracles, just as out-of-control Mentor. But if you play like a really long game against Miracles and you see they're very, very light on Mentors, you can definitely cut more plows in favor of keeping in your lands or your Revokers or what have you. But this is a matchup where Chalice is just so good. Chalice is absolutely nuts in this matchup. It is one of the reason, besides Storm, that I really like Chalice over stuff like Aethersworn nonsense. Because Chalice is just so fucking good against Miracles. The card is actually, like, nonsense. Turns off so many of their cards, it is just actually nuts. And it just, like, overloads a lot of their disenchant effects, too, when you have, like, 3 Chalices, Batterskull, Sword, Vials for them to deal with. And if you go, like, turn 1 Vial and they force it, you've turned 2 Chalice to follow it up. You just have, like... Chalice really makes the matchup, like, lean better for, Death and Taxes. The other card is Cataclysm. Cataclysm is just fucking nuts in these control matchups. We haven't talked about Cataclysm a lot because the control matchups were towards the bottom of this list, but you can play Planeswalkers. They're a little bit more versatile. Like, Karn comes in against, like, Death Shadow and lands or whatever, Karn or Gideon. But, like, Cataclysm, if you want to beat Miracles, you want to beat Grixis, play Cataclysm. Cataclysm is just fucking busted. This card is so good. I will never stop talking about how good Cataclysm is. Because Cataclysm wins you so many games that, like, you either shouldn't win, or, like, you're behind, or, like, they have a Jace and a Lily going, or just, like, a Jace going if they're Miracles, and, like, just have, like, a million lands in play, and you just cast Cataclysm, you have a Vial in play, game's just over, you win. Cataclysm fucked up. Play Cataclysm if you want to beat these control decks. But anyway... Other than that, the game plan is, like, you're definitely the beatdown. Obviously, you need to kill Miracles before they can set up and just control the game and kill you. The turn you're scared of is around their turn 5, where they can, like, set up Terminus the prior couple of turns and go, like, Terminus into Jace you on an empty board. And if they get that, then it's also important to play 2 Cataclysms so they can't bottom both with Jace on the same turn. I mean, if you're digging towards 1 card to kill the Jace versus 2, well, you have to count some, but anyway. You're the beatdown. Definitely, you want to kill them before they can set up well. You want to make it inconvenient for them to try to, like, Terminus over your board and also try to deploy their stuff. Vial is the best card against Terminus, obviously. Being able to deploy your creatures at instant speed is really good. Being able to Flicker Wisp, save your stuff, or end step, play another thing after they, like, cast Jace and think it's safe. Although, I don't think any Miracles players ever think a Jace is safe into, like, a Vial on 3 or whatever, but... Sword of Fire and Ice is always the first grab, basically. Sword of Fire and Ice is very good in this matchup at turning any of your threats into threats. Oftentimes in this matchup, if you have a Vial going, I will put in Recruiter of the Guards and just go find more Recruiter of the Guards, especially with equipment in play. Just like everything is a threat, and you can just keep chaining recruiters. It's a little bit more dangerous to do like Wisp chains, because if they have answers to the recruiter, you just don't chain off. Whereas recruiting a recruiter always finds more recruiters, and is just more consistent at it. So Sword of Fire and Ice makes all your threats good threats. Thalia is super important if you can get Thalia early and start like porting them and stuff. Have you ever given respect to a one-of click with a main phase Sword's activation for miracles? Sometimes I did. I don't anymore, because I think Council's Judgment is more prevalent, and getting your sword Council's Judgment getting your equipment Council's Judgment is really bad. If you see clicks, then maybe start playing around them a little bit more, but generally Council's Judgment is the more accepted good card for miracles to be playing, and putting in your sword's main phase against that is really, really bad. You'd rather them Judgment and then like have to exile your Stoneforge Mystic or whatever. You don't get to put it into play, and it's a tempo loss, but you get to keep your sword, which is super important. And they wasted a 3-mana removal spell on your Stoneforge Mystic, which is arguably trades up, because it's like 4 mana total, because you had to leave up 2 mana on your turn and probably don't have anything to do with it after they cast Council's Judgment. But regardless, you'd much rather them exile that than your sword. Anyway. This is the first matchup that I'll talk about Palace Jailer a lot, and the fact that some people are playing the second Palace Jailer, and Palace Jailer is a really scary card, and I hate playing Palace Jailer. Palace Jailer is a necessary evil because it's a very, very, very powerful card, and it is just, like, very good in these grindy matchups, the Mirror, Miracles, Grixis Control, stuff like that. But it's also incredibly scary, especially against this with flash threats, like Miracles. If you have a creature in play, and you cast Palace Jailer, and they go, end of turn, snap, plow your guy, untap, kill your other guy, attack you with Snapcaster. Now you've lost Monarchy. That's super bad. It's hard to get Monarchy back from control decks, as it turns out, because they're designed to be able to answer all your threats, and when they have a personal Howling Mind, it gets even worse. Notably, that's why the second Jailer gains a little bit of traction in these matchups in particular, because it's a little bit safer. If you have a second Jailer, you can steal back the Monarchy just based on how the ETB works. If you play a Monarchy card and your opponent is the Monarch, you get to just become the Monarch anyway. The opponent loses Monarchy. So being able to have a second Jailer, if your first Jailer gets plowed and they take the Monarchy or something, it's a good safety valve to have. Obviously, it also increases the density of Jailers in your deck, but when you have a bunch of Recruiters, that's less important. It also makes the ticking valve up to 4 a little bit better, because you'll have a second 4-drop to put in. Jailer is definitely a card, like, if you want to be on Jailer against control decks, then you can be playing the second one, because I think having the second is a lot better than just having the one against this deck and against Grixis, which we'll get to in a moment. But again, if you just want haymakers against control decks, just play Cataclysm. It's not hard. I mean, I guess casting Cataclysm is a little bit tricky, because definitely it's not a card you just get to 4 mana and slam, like some other cards, like Gideon and stuff. You definitely have to find your spots and try to weave it in. But it is so devastating. Card is obscenely good against Miracles and Grixis. Anyway, that's about it for this matchup. I guess I'll touch on Surgical, because Envolson talks about it. I guess I'll talk about the... So Envolson is not playing a Chalice the Void list in his example deck list, and I think if you're playing Chalice and you're boarding them, you never board in Surgical Extraction. Surgical Extraction is horrible. Don't board it in. It's very, very, like, it's not worth it, especially with the Namba with Chalice the Void. But if you're not on Chalices, some people board in Surgical against Miracles, which I don't subscribe to the school of thought that is a good idea at all, but I can definitely, like, understand the ideas behind it, because it's not completely unreasonable. Miracles is a deck that actually has very few cards that you care about in terms of being able to kill all your stuff. They're generally on Terminus and Source of Plowshares, and, like, a bunch of random other, like, one-ofs, Council's Judgments, and Engineered Explosives and stuff, but it's generally, like, 3 Terminus, 4 Plows, or whatever. And being able to Surgical all their Plows out of their deck, or all their Terminuses out of their deck, it can be pretty backbreaking, especially if you Surgical a Terminus in response to, like, another Terminus's Miracle trigger on the stack, which you can do. You get to take the Surgical out of their hand and exile all their Terminuses. or surgicling a Snapcaster or surgicling a Swords of Plowshares in response to a Snapcaster Mage targeting it is kind of a big tempo play in terms of being able to deal with their answers without like expending any mana. You do expend the card in hand, which is a big reason why I don't like it, because it's a bad top deck. It is not always a good exchange of resources, because you're losing out on a card that could be a threat or could be like a better answer. Like if they've only cast one plow, they don't have any other plows. Like, what are you surgicaling? If they just like Terminus Jace you, you'd rather have a different card than Surgical Extraction most of the time. And Envelson briefly talks about boarding in Rest in Peace against Miracles, which I think is probably the most nonsensical thing I've read in this article, in my opinion. It seems absolutely insane to do that to me. It is just so beyond what I think is like anywhere reasonable in the Miracles matchup. Miracles is the early game against Miracles is huge, and you never want to be casting Rip on like turn 2 because you want to be developing your board and threatening them before they can just like stabilize and have a safe Jace plus whatever kill you board. So the only time you want to be casting Rest in Peace is like very, very late, and it's already like a really bad top deck when you're in the late game. Because they don't, like, they can already beat you if you're like in that late game and like, okay, you turned off their AK that drew 3 cards this time. They've only drawn 1 card and then 2 cards with their AK. FSD_I_Shinobi, thank you for the follow. Appreciate it. I think the keyword is mission briefing. Mission brief. It's still not worth it. It's still very, 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 very bad. It's not worth 2 mana and a card in your hand to sometimes turn off like the third AK they cast, or make Snapcaster Mage just like future Snapcaster Mage just a 2/1. This matchup is very much about like card equity and how good your cards are, because the Miracles deck is going to be better at grinding than you are, and you are the aggressor. And Rest in Peace is not an aggressive card. It's a very reactive, oh, maybe they don't draw 4 cards off their AK now. But if they're at the point where they can AK for 4 cards, like, you're pretty far behind, and maybe it's like a desperation AK to try to like get back into the game. Yeah, and they're also a Brainstorm deck, which I'll also touch on with like Rest in Peace against Grixis, which I also don't love, but they're a Brainstorm Jace deck. Like, they have dead cards, they can Brainstorm them away. You can't Brainstorm away your Rip when it's bad. You will draw it, and you will have it in your hand, and it will be bad. And Miracles, unlike Grixis, can kill a Rest in Peace if they really, really need to. Like, if you play Rest in Peace, the opponent looks at their hand, they're like, oh, I have 3 Snapcasters in this hand. Like, they'd have Disenchants in their deck. They can get rid of a Rest in Peace if that's, like, a card that is actually affecting their gameplay, and they have, like, no other plans. Otherwise, like, against Grixis, it gets better because they actually can't take it off the board once it hits, because they don't have any enchantment removal, but Rest in Peace is absolutely mental against Miracles. Don't board it in. Just don't do it. Surgical, I don't appreciate, but I can at least see some defense behind it. It's free, which is a big upside over Rest in Peace being 2 whole mana. But no, don't board in Rip. Don't board in Rip. Just moving on is Grixis Control. Oh boy. Grixis Control, I think, is the worst matchup of the main good deck, like, top-tier decks out there. We covered Elves. I don't know why Elves is on this list before 4-color Loam, honestly. But Elves is probably the worst matchup of the matchups we've covered, but I think Grixis Control is the worst matchup of the matches that I would expect to see most often in, like, a given day. This is another, like, weird experimental Chalice matchup that I don't love, but I'll talk about that in a second. Is that 6 for 6? Wow, we only have 5 cards to bring in right now? Is that right? Guess I'm leaving in, like, 1 Revoker. It's okay. Like, they'll have Liliana Last Hope and Jace to answer, but I'll touch on that as we talk about this matchup. So Grixis Control is probably your worst like I said, one of the worst matchups of your top top tier decks, but it's definitely not unwinnable. And I think it's definitely a matchup that you can win, especially if you want to win it. You can play like extra cards for it and such. But let's talk about like generally how the games play out and like what cards matter and what cards don't. So Swords of Plowshares is easy, cut all your plows. Plow is very bad in this matchup, and I think most Grixis players worth their salt are cutting all their Gurmag Anglers, which is the main reason you want to keep in Swords. Gurmag Angler, I think, is the worst card in their deck. If you look at like the traditional Grixis deck list, let's look at what Envolds and stock Grixis deck list is. Yeah, there's like all their cards in their deck are better than Gurmag Angler. Like Strix, Snap, Brainstorm, Edict, Fatal Push, Force, Hymn, Inquisition, Kolaghan's Command, Lightning Bolt, Ponder, Thoughtseize, Jace, Lily. No, all of those cards are better than Gurmag Angler in this matchup. So I think Gurmag Angler is traditionally the first cut that they have, unless like they're inexperienced. I think some people will like just cut all their forces, which I think is wrong because Cataclysm is absolutely backbreaking. But anyway, once they cut Anglers, your swords are bad. Don't play them. Revoker I like to shave or cut completely depending on how my sideboard is situated, because Revoker is really bad against Kolaghan's Command, especially. It leads you to have like a board state that has 2 creatures on it that can both be cleanly answered by a Kolaghan's Command. And also, yes, it answers their Planeswalkers, but they're also a deck filled with removal spells, so like it probably isn't answering a Planeswalker for very long. Sometimes you can catch them if you have a Violent 2 and they cast their Walker. You can Violent their Revoker in response, name it, and hopefully like attack it, take it off the board before they kill your Revoker or something. And like leaving it as one is okay because sometimes it's a good tech card to recruit for if you're like in a top decking war and they found a Jace or something. But this is another matchup where the second Jailer comes into play because this is a deck that has both Snapcaster Mage and also Baleful Strix. Baleful Strix is kind of hard to block for us a lot of the time. We only have like 5-ish flyers in our deck, sometimes only 4. So them being able to take Monarchy is very scary, but being able to have Monarchy is very, very good against them. So the second Jailer helps protect your ability to take back Monarchy if something drastic happens and you slam your Jailer and they untap and they go, Baleful Strix, get you. And you're like, oh shit, they're going to take Monarchy from me, but if you have a backup Jailer, you're able to sometimes take Monarchy back and control the game that way. I think this matchup and Miracles, like I talked about, are the biggest ones where you actually actively want a second Jailer. But other than that, Cataclysm is the nuts in this matchup. Cataclysm just like blows up all their lands, kills all their Jaces, their Lilianas, whatever. Leaves them with sometimes like a Snap and a Baleful Strix or something, but Cataclysm is just so good in these control matchups. It's just Armageddon that also kills all their Planeswalkers. Play Cataclysm if you want to beat this matchup. I think Envolton touches on this matchup is beatable if you want to tech for it a little bit. You can improve this matchup if you want, yeah. Generally difficult matchups, but as games typically go along here as well, there's plenty of opportunities to leverage play skill. The deck list can also be geared more heavily towards beating Grixis control. Yeah. If you want to be playing more cards like Mirran Crusader, or my favorite tech card, which is playing a Hallowed Spiritkeeper in the main, which I probably would do at most paper tournaments because people love Grixis control, especially like old check pile players before Deathray was banned. A lot of them migrated to this deck. Hallowed Spiritkeeper, especially game 1, is just really, really good. Recruiter bullet for this matchup in particular, because it's very hard for them to answer during game 1 unless it's late game and they can just like Jace down tick on it a bunch to keep bouncing it back to your hand. But they don't generally have Wraths in their deck till post-board, and then post-board they only usually have like some number of Marsh casualties, which you can usually get them to cast on like a Mom plus Thalia board or like a Recruiter plus a Wisp board or something like that. Anyway, Judgment obviously answers their Planeswalkers and also is like a backup. Like if they have a Gurmag Angler in the deck still, sometimes you just need a Judgment Gurmag because it is killing you. The other thing to briefly mention is that Chalice of the Voids. I think Chalice of the Void is okay in this matchup, and I think some people board it in, but they have like so many like not 1 mana spells that it gets a little bit dicey. So you look through the list. If you play Chalice, they can cast 4 Baleful Strix, 3 Snapcaster Mage, 2 Diabolic Edict, Force of Will, Hymn to Turok, Kolaghan's Command, Jace, and Liliana, and post-board they can cast their Toxic Deluges or their Marsh Casualties or whatever. Clearly you should board in Willy Fleege and Rage Quit Legacy when him hits everything except it. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother story of how bad I am against him to Turok. I could have a hand of 4 Willy Fleege and like 2 planes, and him guarantee hits 2 planes. But yeah, him to Turok is particularly devastating in this matchup. That's another reason that second Jailer is good, because they have a lot of hand disruption, as opposed to Miracles, which has none. So sometimes your first Jailer gets thought seized or hymned. Same with your, like, Cataclysms. So, like, redundancy is key here. You're playing to the late game because they're often going to thought seize / hymn you and, like, shred your hand, make your hand kind of bad. So you want to be able to late game find your extra Cataclysms and such. And that's why recruitable good cards are also very good in this matchup. Specifically stuff like Spirit Keeper. He does mention, but he does say, like, your stuff is safer in play than in your hand, which is, like, depends on what the card is, but, like, kind of. Him to Tark is really scary, but they also have, like, a bunch of removal. So, like, when you recruit your Palace Jailer, like, okay, yeah, it gets hymned, but then if you, like, recruit your Mirror Crusader and play your Mirror Crusader, then, like, now it gets bolted and stuff. So, like, your stuff is not safe anywhere against Grixis control. I didn't agree with that line a lot in this matchup, but back to the Chalice thing. Chalice Avoid's, like, fine. It turns off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13, 14-ish cards from their deck. Which is definitely not nothing. But generally, you're cutting bombs at the expense of your Chalices, and Mom is still, like, a pretty strong card in this matchup. It does line up poorly against Marsh Casualties, but, like, so does Chalice of the Void in that vein. They're also a Kolaghan's Command deck, so they can blow up your Chalice. It's definitely not as much of a beating as it is against Miracles, where their disenchants are very taxed. Their Kolaghan's Commands are just, like, fucking great against you all the time, and they keep smashing your face in with them. Anything else to cover? Not really. Oh, yeah, the Rest in Peace. I don't love Rest in Peace in this matchup. Envolson brings it in. I used to for a long time before I, like, playtested reasonably extensively against Grixis control. And I found that I really didn't like Rest in Peace in this matchup. It's not great. People bring it in because it turns off Snapcaster Mage, and it turns off Kolaghan's Command chains, like Kolaghan's Command back Snapcaster and kill your thing or make you discard a card or whatever. But I don't think that's the game you want to be playing, because I don't think that's the game you're going to win. So, if you think about it, the first Rest in Peace, so if you play Rest in Peace, you turn off all your opponent's Snapcaster Mages, sure, they're all 2/1s. The Kolaghan's Command is still going to 2-for-1 you. It's still going to make you discard a card or shatter your thing and shock your other thing. They can no longer buy back a card, yes, but it is still always going to 2-for-1 you. Sometimes Kolaghan's Command's a 3-for-1, though. If they buy back a Snapcaster Mage or a Baleful Strix, they can get even more card advantage out of it. And yes, Rest in Peace does turn off that, but it is at the expense of the tempo you lose casting your Rest in Peace and the carded hand that you lose casting the Rest in Peace. If you play Rest in Peace to turn off their ability to Kolaghan's Command their Snapcaster Mage back, but you've played your Rest in Peace, it is still like a 3-for-1. They're still 2-for-1ing you with the card, and you have lost another card in your hand because of the Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace gains equity as they've cast more Snapcaster Mages or Kolaghan's Commands, obviously, but I don't think it's worth the tempo loss or the card loss. I think you'd rather be playing other cards. I think a lot of people are boarding Rest in Peace first Grixis because it is carryover from the check pile days, where you just needed to because Deathrite Shaman was such a fucking devastating card in the matchup, and you just, like, could never, ever, ever beat it. But I think now that Grixis control doesn't get to play Deathrite, then you should not be boarding Rest in Pieces anymore. Alright. How close are we to the end? Because I am very tired. My voice is starting to go. I don't know why I put Esper Stoneblade on this list, in all honesty. Like, I feel like Blue-White's a lot more popular. I think I might just, like, talk about Blue-White Stoneblade instead of Esper. Or I might just put, like, Stoneblade. So the Stoneblade matchup, I'm going to probably talk primarily about Blue-White, but I will touch on the other Stoneblade variants. But Stoneblade matchup is pretty rough. It is a True Nemesis deck, which, as I mentioned way back during the Delver. Thanks for doing the stream. It's pretty awesome content. Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me know. And Volson's article really inspired me to sit down and talk about the sideboards. I don't think I'm going to be doing a league after this. My voice is actually, like, I'm not used to talk. I've been talking for, what, an hour straight now or something? Did I start closer to 3 or 3:30? I've been talking for, like, 2 hours? Hour and a half? See when I posted my streaming going live. 3:16. I've been talking for like an hour and 45 minutes about this. So yeah, I don't think I'm gonna do a league after this. My voice is starting to catch up with me. But anyway, Stoneblade's a pretty rough one because they're a True Nemesis deck, which is just like one of the best cards against Death and Taxes. And they're also an Umezawa's GTA deck, which is also the best card against Death and Taxes. So keep forgetting I'm using shorthand. 2 Judgment, 1 Relic Warder, 1 Recruiter. There's a chance you want. I think you do want Chalice in this matchup, and I think you might actually want Cataclysm in this matchup. But that's like relatively newer thought processes on my end. Like I mentioned towards the beginning, sideboard plans should always be developing and changing, and maybe I'm leaning towards Cataclysm for kind of a similar reason that you boarded against Sneak, honestly. But let's talk about what Embolton does. Cut the Plows, cut the Jailer, shave a Crocus. Yeah, that's fine. I dig it. He does not board in his Cataclysm, notably, but I'll talk about that all. Cut all your Plows, they're bad. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 cards-ish to bring in. Jailer's bad. Ballista's probably pretty bad. I think I actually shaved Thalia's in this matchup. Thalia's. Shave like 1 Thalia. And sideboarding bad draws for your opponents so they don't curve. Stoneforge, TN, and GTA. Equivalent casting Ponders. Well, casting Forcible on both. Side and bad draws for your opponent. Solid line. Yeah, usually you're not going to win a lot of the time against their Stoneforge, TN, and GTA equip curve. And like just like killing all your stuff in the meantime, like you said, like forcing your answers to the GTA and such, but not actually sure what the last cut here would be. I don't hate cutting like a Caracas in this matchup. Caracas doesn't matter. And like I'm trying to adapt more to the 24 land list. I'm trying to give it more of a shot. So like since we're talking about this, it's probably pretty reasonable to shave down to 23 lands in some of these matchups. Probably something like this. I'll talk about Cataclysm here. So generally, your plan is you do have some answers to the GTA True Name curve kill you, where you can cancel Judgment the GTA or the True Name. You can Relic Warder the GTA. You can revoke it, but all these plans are like kind of flimsy. Chalice is decent in this matchup because a lot of their answers are like they don't have a lot of wraths, and Wilson talks about it very well in the matchup in his guide where. They're like miracles, but they don't have nearly as many wraths, so you can play a lot better to the board. And I think Chalice assists with that plan because you get to Chalice all their Plows, which helps you. All Thalias that doesn't seem too crazy for me since they have up to Crocus, and the matchup is very TNN / Stoneforge centric. Yeah, I don't hate like cutting more Thalias. I'll have a question mark here. I think last time I played against Blue White, I cut like more Thalias. I also boarded in Cataclysm because I wanted to try it. But anyway, what was I talking about? Chalice. I think Chalice is actually decent because your game plan is stopping them from getting True Name GTA kill you, and I think Chalice helps protect your stuff from them just like plowing all your stuff away. And they don't have a lot of like other scary cards in their deck other than the Stoneforge GTA plan. They're a Jace deck. I like to consider their non-True Name draws bad miracles essentially, where they just like play a miracles game. Except they don't have as many wraths, so you can lose the long grindy games to like Jaces and stuff, but generally you're better equipped to win those fights. I've been trying Cataclysm out recently because this matchup is a little bit bad, and because you have so many bad cards for it. Wonder if Cata would be good in Blade? Maybe. Keep a True Name in a GTA, kill them. But anyway, Cataclysm, kind of similar as the Sneak and Show matchup, is that it just kind of, you want to Armageddon them if they haven't found True Name yet. It's really bad post-True Name Nemesis. If they have a True Name in play, you just obviously don't want to cast it. But I did take it to decent effect in a matchup recently against Blue White. It was in like the semifinals, I think, of the tournament I won the Volcanic Island a couple weeks ago. But he did not have a true name out, but he had like stone forges and like was setting up. He had like five or six lands in play and like 5 cards in hand still. And sometimes you can just untap and you Cataclysm, blow up a bunch of their lands, and you set them so far behind on trying to get to the Stoneforge GTA or Stoneforge True Name GTA curve. So I don't hate the ability to just try to Armageddon your opponent out from under them before they have it set up, similarly to the Sneak and Show matchup. Basically, Cataclysm them before they get True Name to try to slow them down from getting True Name later, especially in tandem with stuff like Chalice of the Void, so they can't ponder Brainstorm back into lands. Definitely not. Definitely jury's out on it. I kind of like it because we have so many cards that are medium. I just like, you cut 2 more Thalias pretty easily. Just like change this to 3 Thalias and bring in 2 Cataclysms. But this matchup's kind of rough. It's definitely rough if you're inexperienced. Like, they can just curve out and kill you, and it's just, it feels really bad because True Name is like such a fucked up card. It's so hard to beat. Just Chalice 3. That's a good idea. Just put 6 mana Chalice on 3. Get them. Can't cast True Name now. But anyway. Yeah. So I guess in the Black Splash Esper Stoneblade, you do have to be wary of Zealous Persecution. That card can be a huge blowout with your Mom Wisp deck. Hopefully you're cutting Thalias a lot more in the Esper version as well. But the blue-white deck also brings in Supreme Verdict, which is easier to play around because it costs 4 mana, and it's pretty color-intensive. You can like utilize Ports and Wastelands sometimes, although the blue-white deck plays a lot of basics as well, which makes Wasteland less effective. Esper also has Lingering Souls. Yeah, sometimes. I don't think this list even has Lingering Souls when he posted. It's a 3 mana card that's not in True Name. Yeah, this list doesn't. The Esper list that he posted doesn't even have souls. But it's a card that can exist and get you. But I'm sure Supreme Verdict is horrible. It's definitely easier to beat than like Zealous Persecution is, honestly. Zealous Persecution being instant speed and 2 mana is really rough. Supreme Verdict being 4 mana sorcery speed, color intensive, is a lot easier to play around, especially with like stuff like Vials and stuff. A deck that no one plays has this card 20% of the time. Yeah, it's definitely a card to have on your radar. You don't want to overcommit too badly because they do have some rads, but like if you can't afford to, if you're trying to beat the board rather than beat like cards they can have. Sometimes you can also force them to Verdict like they're on True Names if your board is just better than theirs. So that's a way. Also, this goes without saying, but Sword of Fire and Ice is your #1 tutor target every time because it lets you attack their True Name Nemesis, which is the hardest card to beat in their deck, and like one of the hardest cards to beat in the fucking game, in the fucking format for this deck. Fuck True Name Nemesis. I hate that card. Very, very difficult to beat. Anyway. Let's move on here. Lands. Lands is a fun one. But why players hate him, the son of vicious when he gives an unplayable pile with this one weird trick. Love it. Alright. Lands is a matchup. It's weird. I'll talk about it in a second. As soon as I finish, as soon as I write up all the sideboard strats. Something unrelated, but how do we feel about 2 versus 3 Chalices? 2 Chalices is fine. I've been liking 3, but like definitely depending on the meta or depending on what you're trying to attack, 2 Chalices is fine. We were talking about 2 Chalice plus Canonist earlier, which is acceptable. Having like that tutor bullet that's better in some matchups than Chalices and others is totally reasonable. I've been enjoying 3 Chalices, but I definitely wouldn't be opposed to playing 2. I've ran 2 recently. 2 Chalices because the third foil breaks the bank. I don't own 3 foil Chalices, actually. That's accurate. I need to order a third if I'm going to play it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What are we cutting here? All the Thalia. Jite. Crusader, the Ballista, I think. A Stoneforge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We cut another card. This is one of those things that like my brain isn't registered. Like I'm used to playing the 23 land lists with the extra thing. That thing usually being like a Spirit Keeper, which is an easy cut here. I would like shaving our Revoker. Revoker's like pretty medium. You can see like shaving our Revoker, maybe shaving like a Plow. I tend to like be a little bit overzealous on removal in this matchup, which sometimes comes back to bite me because sometimes you don't have a threat. Just do something like that. This looks okay. But anyway, this game plan plays out pretty weirdly, especially if you're not on Remorseful Cleric lists. I understand that Remorseful Cleric's kind of a unpopular sideboard tech nowadays, but I've been really liking it. But assuming you don't have one, game 1 plays out a lot like find Sanctum Prelate as fast as possible or you're dead. You are not winning game 1 without Sanctum Prelate. -4 +2 paths worked for me over. No one has Tabernacles. I hate cutting all my Plows, because Tireless Tracker is a really scary card out of the board, and also sometimes you just want to be able to answer a sneaky Merit Lage. Like when you have them more or less locked down, you've extracted their loams or something. One of their only ways to beat you is Merit Lage, and you do want answers to it. So I like keeping in I like keeping in too much removal over cutting down too much, especially on the Tireless Tracker plan, especially. But anyway, back to the game 1s. Sanctum Prelate is your best card. Your game plan is get Sanctum Prelate out, step 1. Step 2, equip it with a Sword of Fire and Ice, and you should be pretty golden. Sanctum Prelate on 2 is so good against this deck, especially pre-board. They literally started playing a Barbarian Ring in the deck after Sanctum Prelate was printed because they could not beat the card. Their plans are like Barbarian Ring it, or sometimes they have a Molten Vortex in the main, which is hard to tutor for except for Gamble. So Prelate on 2, put an equipment on it. GTA works in a pinch, but Sword of Fire and Ice is just way better. But GTA can also protect it from the aforementioned cards if you get counters on it. That's the game plan. The other game plan is if you have Remorseful Cleric, sometimes you can like exile their Loam or their Punishing Fires and actually like play a normal game of Magic. But most of the pre-board involves just Turbo Prelate, try not to die, being able to like flicker with Merit Lages out of the way and stuff like that. Post-board, you get a lot of good cards, specifically the Graveyard Hate. Rip is great, Surgicals are great. Recruiter is an extra Sanctum Prelate. Council's Judgment exiles a lot of their problematic stuff. Answers post-board Tireless Trackers as well as like drops of honey or whatever they may have. He mentions talks a little bit about boarding and Cataclysm here, which I'm not a huge fan of, but he also is not a huge fan of it. He talks specifically about it. Let me find the spot. Cataclysm is actually not that great against lands alone because they can quickly rebuild with the life from the Loam engine, but it is your only reset button if they've had it going for a while already. That's basically how I feel. It's like not great. I think if you're boarding in a 4-mana card, I'd rather just be boarding in Chalice of the Void in this matchup because like Chalice of the Void on 2 is like a shitty untutorable Sanctum Prelate. It turns off the same life from the Loams and Punishing Fires and stuff. I definitely don't like it. I've thought about it, though, but it's not good, but I think it's a better plan than Cataclysm most of the time, as just backup Sanctum Prelates. If you have a second Sanctum Prelate, then this matchup also gets a little bit better, because post-board they'll have more answers for your first one. Drop of Honey, other stuff. I don't know, Engineered Explosives, sometimes they have. Just random other shit. But generally your plan is, like, Surgical, all their Punishing Fires, or all their Loams, gimp them pretty hard, or rest in peace away some of their stuff. And still, your plan is just get a Sanctum Prelate out and try to win the game that way. Punishing Fire is a hard card to beat, so you want to be able to it's gas paired with anything versus the Loam engine, but maybe that's optimistic. Yeah, I think it is a little bit optimistic. It's really bad against the Infinite Wasteland deck. just life and loaming back wastelands with exploration and stuff. You do have a bunch of basics, so it's like less bad, but I definitely don't love the plan. It's like okay. I think Cataclysm is maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse than Chalice of the Void in this matchup. I don't think you want either of them. I think you're fine. You can also, like, I don't know, put Chalice on 1, stop their gambles and their crop rotations and their post-board drop of honey or whatever. But a lot of that is decklist dependent. If you manage, like, surgical them in game 2 and you see that, like, oh, their only answer to the Signet Prelate is, like, some drops of honey out of the board and Molten Vortex. You can get Signet Prelate and, like, Chalice on 1 and stuff. But you can't do that in that order. But because Signet Prelate on 2 would nullify Chalice on 1, but Chalice on 1 into Signet Prelate is similar to, like, putting a sword on your Signet Prelate to protect it from a lot of stuff. Protects it from a lot besides, like, Barbering, but again, very often decklist dependent, and I think neither of those cards are worth it, and you want to just be boarding in your Graveyard Hate and your extra answers. Like I mentioned earlier, I go a little overboard on removal, because generally when you have the lock set up, one of the ways they can cheese their way out of it is by just, like, manually setting up the Dark Depths combo, or by just, like, trackering you out of the game with just, like, tracker, loam, fetch lands, exploration, just, like, making a giant tracker, drawing a bunch of cards. So I like being able to answer extraneous threats. Sometimes they'll even have, like, a Crucible, or the Crucible guy. What's his name? The one from Amonkhet? Whatever. He's a green Crucible Worlds dude. I even saw, like, a Green Sun package once where, like, they boarded in that and Tracker and, like, some Green Sun Zeniths to find them, but beside the point. I go a little bit overboard on removal, but I wouldn't fault people for shaving down on the number of swords, but I definitely like keeping in a decent chunk of removal for their deck, because you do need to be able to answer their, like, random scary cards, like Tireless Tracker, or just randomly, like, they try to Merit Lage you while you have Rest in Peace out. That's one of the ways that they steal it. But be wary, because post-board, they will have better answers to your Signet Prelate, just as you will have better answers to their engine. They'll have Corrosive Grips for your Rest in Pieces. They will be trying to play around Surgical Extraction with, like, leaving groves up, or crop rotating into a grove in response to Surgical on a P-Fire, or the Cycle lands in response to Surgical on Loam. So be careful on casting Surgical against them. It's a little bit tricky if it gets later into the game. Typically early, they can't afford to play around it, so you can try to snipe it then. But that's most of the lands matchup, I suppose. Arkin, thanks for the host. Appreciate it. Welcome, welcome, everybody. We're doing a little bit of a D&T sideboarding discussion right now. We're almost done, actually. I think I got to the final list here, or the final deck. Hello, hello, everybody. The last deck we're going to talk about today, I suppose, is Red Stompy, which is a very good matchup, but has gotten a little bit worse or just recently. But anyway, so against Red Stompy, you want Cataclysm, you want Relic Warder, you want the extra Recruiter. What's up, Arkin? How'd your stream go? Jim Miles, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. You want your extra paths, and you want Council's Judgments. This matchup gets a little bit finicky in what you're cutting, and a lot of it I kind of tend to play by ear a little bit. 4-1 and 3-2 to dude. Moto is a great software sometimes. Oh, filing for reimbursement. Gotcha. What do I cut in this matchup? Cleric. How many cards? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think I shave a Stoneforge and... No, Batterskull's actually... No, I don't shave Batterskull. It's really good against their Rabble Masters, which I'll get to in a second here. Probably, like, Moms and Thalios. This is another matchup where Envolson has some weird ideas of sideboarding. He cuts both... He cuts all the Thalios. Yeah, that's fine. He gets Brightling and Sword of Fire and Ice, though, which seems like kind of crazy to me. I think something like this doesn't look bad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. Sometimes I might, like, leave in some number, or cut more moms for Thalias, but something like this looks pretty okay to me. But this is a matchup that's gotten a little bit worse recently, because they started playing more Goblin Rabble Masters. They're now playing, like, 4 Rabble Master, 4 Legion Warboss. And basically the only games that I lose to this deck anymore are games where they just go, like, turn 1 Rabble, turn 2 Rabble, turn 3 Rabble, and they just, like, bury you before you can, like, get your defenses up. You're so good at fighting the late game against this deck. Thalia's biggest boon is probably blanking Rabble Master. Yeah. Thalia being able to block the Rabble Masters is decent. So, like, maybe on the play, Thalia gets a little bit better. You cut the moms, and you call the moms, bring in some number of Thalias or something. But, the main way you lose this game is to a bunch of Rabble Masters. In the past, I used to actually, like, not bring in paths, or, like, bring in less paths or something. Sometimes even shave plows based on their creature density, but since they've been playing 8 Rabble, you need all your removal, because that's the easiest way for you to lose, is them having uncontested Rabble Master and you just getting flattened by it. The late game, you have stuff that's, like, absolutely nothing in the matchup. Cataclysm's just so backbreaking for that deck. They just, like, have a bunch of hate artifacts and, like, sitting behind 2 Ensnaring Bridges, having a Chandra in play and, like, a Rabble Master. And you just get to Cataclysm, sweep a bunch of it away, blow up all their chalices. They usually keep, like, a bridge or a chalice. If they keep a bridge and they get Cataclysmed, they're not going to be able to keep the bridge up for that long, because they're going to be drawing a bunch of uncastable cards unless they get really lucky and rip a bunch of lands. But yeah, Cataclysm is nuts in this matchup. Your equipment are important. There are some notable tricks in this matchup. Envolton's has a Brightling, mine doesn't, but Brightling can get under bridge, because you can make it an 05 or an 06. Yeah, make it an 06 and then declare attacks and then pump it back up. If you have enough mana for it, which you tend to, because these games can go very, very long. Similarly, Stoneforge Mystic and Umezawa's GTA can get under a bridge. If you have a Stoneforge Mystic and a GTA with any number of counters on it, no, you need at least 2 counters, sorry. And 2 or more counters on it, you can neg1 your own Stoneforge Mystic, make it an 0-1, attack, and then pump it. And now it's a 2-3, and it attacks, deals them 2, and you get 2 GTA counters back. So for essentially no GTA counters, you can do attack with your 2-3 through a bridge with 0 cards in hand. So some notable tricks in this matchup to beat Ensnaring Bridge, because that's a card that sometimes you can get got by. Prelate's super important in this matchup. Their scariest cards, besides the early Rabbles, are like Fiery Confluence, which just like rats your whole board, shatters a bunch of your stuff, all that jazz. Prelate on 4 is really good because it stops both Fiery Confluence and their Chandra, which is another scary card. Other than that, Walking Ballista helps a lot against bridges. I literally cast a Walking Ballista for 8, not with 8 mana, with 16 mana, made a Walking Ballista for 8 to kill a guy behind a bridge, behind like 2 bridges and like 12 Rabble Master tokens or something. But Walking Ballista is really good. It also, like, it can deal with Rabble Masters. It costs 4 mana to kill a single Rabble Master, but it's very useful at dealing with Planeswalkers or their Durly creatures and that sort of thing. Your Wisps are at a premium. Sometimes it's right to, like, early on Wisp their Mox, their Chrome Moxen and stuff. So they have to either exile more cards from their hand or they lose the mana. But oftentimes you'll just sandbag Wisps to like, go Wisp, exile both your bridges, attack with a giant board. Because you'll just be sitting there waiting to find stuff. And that's another reason Palace Jailer is useful in this matchup, for the same reason. So many of these games come down to either dying on turn 3 or whatever, turn 4 to a million Rabbles, but the other games go to like turn infinity, and Palace Jailer drawing you 2 cards a turn and finding you your double Wisp, or your Recruiter Wisp, or your Segda Prelate to put on 4, or your Ballista. Palace Jailer is great. Also, sometimes they only have like 1 Rabble Master, and you can eat their Rabble Master with it, and then keep drawing cards, stuff like that. But this matchup is very, very good. This is like one of the most favorable matchups in top-tier Legacy decks. This and probably Turbo Dips. If you sit down across from a Red Prism player or a Turbo Dips player, these are the matchups you want to be playing the most at Zeth and Texas. But it definitely has gotten less good with the advent of playing Legion Warboss, in addition to Goblin Rabble Master, so you do have to be wary of that. I've definitely been cheesed out of games by just turn 1, Soul Land, Chrome Mox, Rabble Master, turn 2, Legion War Boss, turn 3, Chandra or Fire Confluence your face or whatever. Maybe leaving Thalia's over Path, since Thalia essentially is removal and also slows down Fire Confluence. Path's pretty important. Like, also being able to turn 1 a Path versus Thalia comes down in turn 2. If they go turn Rabble Master and you're on the draw, like, they're getting very far ahead before you play Thalia. And then if you play Thalia and then they answer it, it's really bad, whereas they can't answer a Path. Removal, I think, has gotten much more important since they upticked on Goblin effects. And they're also, like, a big mana deck. Thalia doesn't usually stall them for that long. They have a lot of mana sources in their deck. Just a bunch of Soul Lands, Chrome Moxes, and stuff. Thalia usually doesn't slow them down that long. But I can definitely buy Thalia being a little bit better when you are on the play, and you can play it on turn 2. Anyway, I think that covers the 15 matchups that Envolson covered. The only notable exclusion, I think, in terms of the Legacy metagame, ignoring Phoenix, because Phoenix is definitely a new up-and-comer, I think the only notable exclusion was 4-color Loam, which I guess I could discuss a little bit, but I've been talking for, like, almost 2 hours at this point. No, over 2 hours. I started at 3:15. Over 2 hours. And I'm pretty happy with where we ended up. It was a interesting, like, a different streaming thing rather than just, like, running through playing another league. Will you be posting your guide on the Discord? What, this little document thing? I guess I could. I'll definitely be posting this whole YouTube recap, or this whole video recap to YouTube as well, if you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts. But I guess I can go and post my my sideboard thoughts here. Covered 15 matchups, and I had, like, more or less in-outs. I'll probably post, like, the deck list at the top here as well, just so people see, like, visualize the ins and outs based on the deck list. I do want to reiterate again, for people that didn't watch, like, I said this at the very, very beginning when I started talking about this, and I loved what Envolson had to say about it in his sideboard guide. Scroll all the way back up. Even though Legacy is a relatively stable format without too many new cards each set, I find that it is still somewhat in flux all the time, so I constantly develop and refine my sideboard plans, and you should too. This guide reflects my current approach to some of the most popular decks in Legacy, but I always look for ways to improve or adapt based on what I see out of my opponent's board, as well as what experience through repetition teaches me about roles in certain matchups and key cards. Please keep in mind that everything in D&T is wonderfully contextual, so you should always use your own judgment in the current game situation and ask yourself the evergreen question, how do I lose, before you proceed with the game? I own 8 Brightlings. I like Brightling. I think Brightling is like a fine card right now, especially with, like, Delver running around. Blue-Red Delver has gotten more popular, and Brightling, I think, is very good against that deck. I own, like, 3 Brightlings, I think. I bought 3 foils before they spiked. But I'd definitely, like, not be opposed to playing 1 or 2. Tommy from Rugrats, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. But anyway, yes, I don't claim to be a super great Death and Taxes player. I claim to be a guy who streams Death and Taxes a lot, and some people want to hear my thoughts about it. So feel free to disagree with me and like, argue that, like, my ideas are bad or whatever, because some ideas are probably wrong. I'm definitely not the end-all be-all resource for this deck. These are my thoughts and my thoughts alone. These are not the correct thoughts or anything. But I just wanted to share what I had to say about sideboarding and stuff. I got really inspired after reading Envolson's article, and I really liked how he talked about it and the approach to matchups and all that stuff. So, yeah. Go read his articles if you haven't. Just, like, he has a 3-part series on D&T over at snapcardster.com right now. And, the third part that just came out talked a lot about sideboarding. The first 2 talked a lot more, was a lot more in-depth about, like, the deck itself. But if you're a new Death and Taxes player or a veteran Death and Taxes player, his article will help you a ton. Like, I read it and I learned a lot of things. I've been playing this deck for, like, 6 years or something. Anyway, drag this over here. I'm going to call the stream. I think I put in the stream title, maybe a league after, but no, I've been talking for, like, way too long. I'm not, I don't stream enough to be physically prepared for just sitting there and rambling for like 2+ hours about stuff. But I really enjoyed this. Let me know if you liked this. If you like this format, if you want me to like do anything similar, like maybe like more in-depth breakdowns of certain matchups and stuff. Like, a lot of my thoughts were very like stream of consciousness and very like bouncing around between different ideas, especially with like interactions with chat and stuff. But I enjoyed doing this, and I would definitely talk about it more, like talking about specific matchups and what my plans are, and like in more and more detail. So let me know. I'm very tired. I'm gonna go. I should have brought water to this. That probably would have helped. But I'm gonna go grab a water bottle after the stream. Let's find someone to host. I'm the only one playing Legacy. Or I wasn't even like playing Legacy, but I'm the only one currently. I'm gonna host. No one's even playing Vintage. Anyone I'm following? Not really. Yeah, I got nothing. I'll just host some guy playing Modern, I guess. Modern Red Living End. Man, none of these are like people I want to host. Anyone have any hosting ideas? Feel free to throw it out. I'll just host this random guy playing Modern Living End here. Glaubert. Never seen this person, but I like to try to carry on people, hosting other people, just keep the chain going. Anyway, I will be posting my little like side column of ins and outs onto the Discord, I guess. Maybe I'll make a Google Doc and like link it in the video description if people want to see it. So for people on YouTube that can find it, or people that aren't in the Discord can find it. This video will also obviously be on YouTube if you want to like watch my whole 2-hour-long process of talking about these decks and stuff. But thanks everybody for watching. Hope you had a good time. If you want to support the channel some more, you can follow, subscribe, donate, do all that good stuff. This YouTube video, as well as all my other YouTube videos, are over on the channel. Link down below. Twitter link is also down below if you want to know my like streaming schedule when I'm going live and all that. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. Hope you had a good time, because I really enjoyed doing this breakdown. And have a good weekend, everybody.